Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to day 13 of the Viva Supplementary Environment Effects Statement hearings. We have a slightly updated running sheet for today as Georgia has been contacting our submitters over the course of yesterday afternoon. So I think with Georgia, have you managed to print out a couple of copies? And so if you're here early and you want to present early, we'll see if we can slot you in to an earlier slot if any gaps open up. Member Brisker is joining us online for the morning session today, as a number of the submissions have raised areas that are within her technical expertise. Are there any preliminary matters that any of the parties want to raise before we get started today? Mr Townsend?
Thank you, Member Carlisle. There's one matter we reserved to raise this morning. They presentation in today's list from the Environment Victoria.
Yes.
They're represented by Mr. Forster.
Yes.
You will have noticed when the original submission was filed by that party, they attached an opinion.
Yes.
Of Mr. Harry. We have treated that as submission.
Yes.
And we expect that today that is the approach with it. So I thought I should get in front of that and say, therefore, obviously we wouldn't expect questions being put to Environment Victoria by us or anyone seeking to examine the opinion of that person. We'll treat that as part of the submission, and in our reply submission, just make any comments we need to make on the premise that it's submission only.
Yes. Well, Dr. Parry hasn't been called as an expert, so there's no other way we can treat that.
I agree. I just thought probably best to do it now rather than have to jump in if something comes up.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Any other matters to raise before we get started today? Okay. Well, first up we have Friends of the Earth, represented by Ms. Leonard. Is Ms. Leonard online? Ah, there you are. Okay. Hello.
Hello.
We can hear you, so we'll hand over to you to take us through your submission.
Great, kicking off early, love it. So I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Freya Leonard. I'm the No More Gas campaign coordinator for Friends of the Earth Melbourne, and I come with a 5-year history of campaigning against the gas industry in the not-for-profit sector, in addition to decades of advocacy across a range of environmental and social matters. Friends of the Earth Melbourne has operated for over 50 years as a peak environmental and social justice organisation. We have affiliations in 72 countries. Friends of the Earth Melbourne has a long history of concern about the Viva floating regasification and storage unit proposal for Corio Bay. We submitted to the original inquiry in April 2022, and we've presented to the associated hearing subsequently and again in this most recent state government review of the project. I want to just take a moment to thank Planning Panels Victoria for the opportunity to again present to the Viva Energy Gas Terminal Project Supplementary EES Inquiry and Advisory Committee hearings, roughly 2.5 years after the last round of hearings for this project. So we're informed in the directions hearings that this round of hearings will not consider climate and potential community impacts and that they're not under consideration. However, I want to point to the impacts of climate and community safety and state that they are absolutely considerations in our view for this project. As the planet heats up and we're lurching into climate catastrophe. The Victorian Government has recognised this by, in 2023, increasing their commitment to achieving net zero emissions by 2045, instead of the old target of 2050. So the world is on track for 2.7 degrees heating on pre-industrial levels. Ocean temperatures are at their highest level of heating in the Anthropocene era, and ocean heat waves are now almost the norm, including oceans around Victoria and Tasmania, most pertinently. The unprecedented winter wildfires of California should remind us of our own record-breaking bushfires just 6 years ago, and of the other escalating climate impacts such as the storms currently lashing Sydney, that compel us and all other species on Earth to either adapt or perish. Climate change is always a foundational issue to every decision for us from now on, as the only species that can affect material change over our climate impact. Section 20 of the Climate Change Act 2017 requires that the Victorian Government will endeavour to ensure that any decision made by it appropriately takes account of climate change by having regard to the Act's policy objectives, which includes Section 22A, subsection A, to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions consistently with the long-term emissions reduction target and interim emissions reduction targets. Viva's own supplementary statement main report references greenhouse gas emissions at several points, including identifying it as the top listed priority in managing their environmental footprint. So we therefore argue that this must be a consideration for the purpose of these hearings. And we further argue that the significant scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions forecast to be produced by this project each year must immediately rule this project out of consideration by the state government. Similarly, we state that community safety must always be a priority. Housing is in ever greater crisis in this state and nationally, and cost of living pressures mean that the people of Corio Bay have shrinking options to move to safer housing outside of the 3.5 kilometre exclusion zone, which represents world's best practice for a floating gas terminal. Irrespective of whether this round of inquiry considers it or not, a leak, fire or explosion will affect the 30,000 householders living within 2 kilometres of the terminal. I'm just going to pause here for a second to say that my computer is notifying me that I have poor network quality. Are you still able to hear me clearly?
And there's no glitches, so
Right.
let's keep going and cross our fingers.
Thanks, Manuela. There's 30,000 householders living within 2 kilometres of the terminal, and the terminal is particularly in proximity to other complex industries and a big pile of flammable wood chips. The Viva gas terminal would operate just 250 metres from the nearest homes and would rely on fair weather conditions to operate safely. The extreme wind events experienced in Victoria in recent years should be enough to take this project and others like it out of consideration permanently. To permit this project, we argue, would be to ignore the fantastic work currently on foot with the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, as well as the Victorian Fisheries Authority. So DECA, for instance, are in the process of winding back gas use statewide through reforms including refusing new gas connections under planning permit, moving away from replacement gas appliances under the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program, and are currently considering a suite of reforms to phase out heavy use gas appliances like heating and hot water. These reforms will make a material impact on gas demand in Victoria, the heaviest gas using state or territory in the country domestically. And these reforms are working. From 2022 to 2023, Victoria's gas use declined from 200 petajoules to 175 petajoules annually. With the current and incoming reforms, it's reasonable to assume an exponential decline, particularly as gas meter abolishments increase, raising the overall service charge for bill payers above the current network access charge of around $1 a day. As people pay more for just staying connected to the network and continue to face rising gas prices, so spot prices increased in Victoria 18% in 2024 from 2023, according to the Australian Energy Market Operator. As this continues, more people will join the stampede away from gas and the rate of non-payment disconnections will rise. This is directly relevant to this proposal. The high maintenance cost of floating gas terminals will ensure that any gas imported from Australia and Qatar through Viva's facility will be prohibitively expensive, and within a few short years, this will be a dangerous gas terminal with a dwindling customer base. We want to ask the state government and the members present today, is it really worth the climate impact and the strong potential for an industrial disaster within 1 to 2 kilometres of people's homes to import a product that Victoria is already leaving behind in favour of cleaner energy options? Alongside the effective national leadership of DECA in gas reforms and decarbonising Victoria's energy economy, the Victorian Fisheries Authority have invested heavily in improving the abundance and health of marine stocks in Corio Bay through their Shellfish Reefs Revitalisation Program, through seeding native flat oysters and blue mussels into these reefs, and through the release of calamari, squid, whiting and snapper for recreational fishers. Maritime accidents or even just the normal functioning of the terminal would jeopardise this fantastic revitalisation of Corio Bay's marine species. This, in addition to the multiple and broad-ranging acknowledged impacts of the project, even under normal operating conditions on migratory birds, endangered species, benthic marine health, and the potential for turbidity, should give us pause. Further to this, we note the contribution from Ports Victoria, finding that significant design changes are required by the proponent to their channel configuration planning and assessments to address emergency scenarios. They found that the navigation and mooring risk assessment for the terminal is inadequate. Given that this is the second time that Viva has had the opportunity to present the state government and associated agencies, as well as the community as a whole, with an EES that addresses the considerable range of concerns already raised, it is concerning that such critical issues remain unsatisfied in the views of Ports Victoria. Viva have earlier asserted that only 490 cubic metres of dredging will be required to prepare the channel for an LNG tanker, but navigational safety studies haven't been done, so we don't know the true extent of the dredging that's necessary. This is a critical matter impacting marine life in the short and longer term, with potential impacts on underwater cultural heritage. For the proponent to fail to produce these studies at this late stage in the project proposal is a further demonstration that they are apparently incapable of managing a project of this potential scale of impact. As the channel currently is, attempting to push an LNG tanker into Corio Bay is somewhat akin to trying to shove a sausage into a drinking straw. Clearly, significant dredging will be required, and in order for the community to give full informed consideration of this project and for the committee to make informed recommendations as to the future of the project, we firmly believe that the full scope of the required dredging alongside robust navigational studies must be provided. We also note that unsatisfied are the requirements to provide adequate cultural values to the adequate cultural values assessments. As a non-Indigenous person, I'm not going to attempt to tackle the substance of this in detail, and I know that there are traditional custodians presenting to this hearing who will be better able to address these matters substantively. However, it appears that after all these years of preparation and planning, the proponent has still failed to satisfy Recommendation 12 of the Planning Minister's direction, requiring provision of a completed cultural values assessment. More than this, without the previously mentioned navigational safety studies, or an accurate report on the scope of the dredging required, traditional custodians can hardly make an adequately informed comment on the likely impacts on their underwater cultural heritage posed by this project. So in the absence of a CVA for public consideration and, more importantly, relevant First Peoples consideration, we assert that the supplementary EES and associated appendices and documents is incomplete and cannot therefore be fully considered. In fact, on the whole, and in reading over other submissions and hearing other presentations so far to the hearings, particularly expert submissions, a regular complaint seems to be about what is missing as much as what is contained in the supplementary EES as submitted by Viva. This was certainly the case in the first round of public submissions and hearing contributions in 2022, and it doesn't inspire confidence that it is still, by so many accounts, the case today. By their own conduct, therefore, I suggest that Viva are not able to satisfy the requirements of a responsible operator of a facility so vulnerable to catastrophe, whether through climate impacts, operational malfunction, human error, or sabotage, and sited just a couple of 100 metres away from people's homes. A reasonable person, particularly one living on the northern shore close to Corio Bay, could be forgiven for thinking not. As a final point, I would like to remind the members that in July 2023, Australia signed the Joint Statement on Accelerating Methane Mitigation from the LNG Value Chain in collaboration with Japan, the Republic of Korea, United States, and the European Union to lower methane emissions in the liquefied natural gas supply chain. And in December of that year, we signed on to the Global Methane Pledge, making an admittedly non-binding but still commitment to reduce our methane emissions by 30% by 2030. Little has been said about this in subsequent federal policy discussions, but it is the responsibility of the federal as well as state and territory governments to ensure that we do everything we can to meet our own targets. So in conclusion, in the interests of Victoria, meeting our state target of net zero emissions by 2045 and federal commitments to methane emissions reductions, in the interests of bird and marine life dependent on the Ramsar listed wetlands and the marine environment of Corio Bay, for the safety of households living near Corio Bay, and in the interests of not permitting consent to a company that has twice failed to meet the requirements of a responsible operator of a potentially very dangerous facility, Friends of the Earth Melbourne urges the Victorian Government to refuse this project. And I thank the members for the time here today.
Thanks, Ms. Leonard. You obviously had some detailed speaking notes there. They would be helpful if you're prepared to provide them to the committee, if you could forward those through.
Absolutely.
And thanks for the time taken to prepare and to present to us today. I'll just check in with our members as to whether there are any questions.
Not from me, thank you.
Any from Member Briscoe?
Not from either.
No. Thank you. Thank you for your submissions.
Thanks so much, Nicola.
Okay, next up we have Environment Victoria. Mr. Foister. Now we have a PowerPoint presentation from you as well as your original submission. So we'll hand over to you to take us through that.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to submit before the panel. I want to begin, as others have, by acknowledging that we're working and living on the land of the Wadawurrung people, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Also want to recognise that sovereignty was never ceded, and that the Victorian treaty process provides an opportunity to address that historical injustice. Now, if we could move to the next slide, I'll give a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about, and then get into it. So I'll briefly explain who Environment Victoria is, and our qualifications in this area. I'll go through findings from Dr. Gregory Parry. We included a report from Dr. Gregory Parry as an appendix to our submission, largely because he wasn't available to be an expert witness over the summer break. I'll make some brief comments on marine ecology evidence so far and how it relates to Dr. Parry's evidence, and also Environment Victoria's opinion on what has been presented to date. And then raise, as others have, a link between navigation studies, dredging and marine ecology impacts. But I want to go a little bit further and tie it back to the terms of reference and the Minister's directions, given that the proponent has insisted on a literal interpretation of those. And then I'll end on recommendations coming out of this evidence. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about Environment Victoria. We are a peak environment group in Victoria, established in 1969. We have 40 member groups and 200,000 individual supporters. So there's a lot of people that are concerned about the environment and climate in this state. We have long-term expertise in climate, the gas market as it relates to the energy transition, Victorian government policy and wetland ecology, particularly relating to Ramsar sites. And we were a party to the previous relevant inquiries ranging from the Crib Point IAC to the first Viva gas terminal inquiry. I'll briefly go through, if you go to the next page, I'll just briefly go through Dr. Parry's evidence. I've got a little slide here explaining his credentials. He was previously the manager of dredging during the 1997 to 98 Geelong Channel Improvement Program. He wrote the Victorian Dredging Guidelines. He's been widely published, and we did include his report as an appendix. So if there's anything that doesn't make sense about my evidence here today, it's probably explained in more detail in that report. So first, going through some of his comments, he points out that there's an inappropriate comparison between Corio Bay and other areas for seagrasses in the studies relating to recommendations 1A and 1B. Those are studies relating to existing discharges and also seagrass mapping. He points out that the ecology of Corio Bay differs significantly from broader Port Phillip Bay. If you see the image on screen, the red highlighted sections are for Corio Bay and Swan Bay, which are very sheltered, What this means is that the main nitrogen source in Corio Bay and Swan Bay comes from seagrass leaves that are retained within the bay and not from external sources. But if we go to the next slide, we can see a general map of Port Phillip Bay with a nitrogen plume extending from the Western treatment plant, showing nitrogen oxides and ammonium concentrations higher in the middle of the bay and on the northeastern edge of the Bellarine Peninsula. And this is highly relevant because if we go to the following slide, for this study were Bellarine Bank and St Leonards, which are on the northeastern edge of the Bellarine Peninsula, and these are likely affected by the Western treatment plant plume and are therefore inappropriate comparison sites. And Dr. Parry raises this because these sites show a greater year-on-year variation in abundance of seagrass than would be expected in Corio Bay, and this is later on used to dismiss observed changes near the W5 outlet during the study, but the dismissal should not stand because the comparison sites are inappropriate. Just moving on to the next slide, please, as well. And from here, I'll start to relate it back to some existing evidence from previous experts. So Dr. Parry also said the study on existing charges was fatally compromised by differences between impact and reference sites, incorrect assumptions, and use of a generic seagrass category. And if we quickly just move to the next slide, perhaps actually the slide after that, and I'll show it on screen. So this is a figure from technical report A and shows the reference sites, which are in yellow and they face east, and the impacted sites are in yellow facing east near the refinery, and the reference sites are in blue facing southwest. So the impacted sites near the refinery are sheltered from prevailing wind and waves, but the reference sites are exposed. And this is important because the seagrass species under consideration prefer sheltered sites, and the more exposed reference sites may naturally have less seagrass. And so a finding of equal amounts of seagrass at both sites may indicate that the impact sites have less seagrass than they would have had without the refinery being there. In the absence of data from before the refinery, it's critically important to select appropriate sites, which hasn't been done. I note that Dr. Edmonds raised similar concerns in his evidence with his slide presentation. That was document 91, where he said that he had concerns about the site selection as well, and said the hypothesis for this section was not rational. Quickly going to the next slide. Dr. Parry also raised concerns about incorrect assumptions in this study. The differences between impact and reference sites is further compromised because the study assumes each seagrass class had a particular percentage of cover instead of calibrating this relationship or analysing the proportions of the different density classes. Now, I know this came up during some of the expert evidence. If you remember, there was an assumption that dense seagrass is 95% seagrass coverage, moderate is 50%, 10%, etc. And in the expert conclave, it was agreed that this was a historical method, in other words, an old and outdated method, and that there are more recent seagrass density classification schemes, which would have been more useful. The other thing that Dr. Parry pointed out was that the study should have used a different test. It used a t-test instead of a chi-squared independence test. And this becomes important because several experts have identified a lack of statistical analysis or a poor choice of statistical analysis as a key flaw of some of the technical work in these studies. In response to that, the proponent has said in their closing submission that the minister's directions do not mandate any particular type of statistical analysis. Now, from my perspective, I see that as I have an issue with that in that the proponent hasn't actually responded to the technical criticisms. They've instead relied on a legal interpretation, which is that the minister's direction should be interpreted very narrowly and literally. And if you do that, you don't have to do that proper scientific work. And I think that is not the correct response, because a technical flaw should be addressed with a technical response. It shouldn't be dismissed through a legal interpretation. If we go to the next slide. Dr. Parry also mentions that a use of a generic seagrass category rather than individual species biases the outcome towards finding non-significant differences between control and impact sites if one species is more susceptible than another. And I might just pause there and just make a few additional comments on the marine ecology evidence so far, and then go into dredging, because it seems like its own separate topic. As mentioned, once we saw Dr. Edmonds' report, we had additional concerns about marine ecology because it goes beyond what Dr. Parry had identified in our appendix and submission. Not only does Dr. Parry's report not only does Dr. Edmonds' report concur with Dr. Parry's report around the inadequacy of seagrass mapping, inappropriate comparison sites, lacking statistical analysis, but it also raises new concerns around a lack of a systematic approach. And if I could characterise it, the proponent's expert and submission seems to want to narrow the definition of what is being studied, and Dr. Edmonds has put forward best practice whole ecosystem approach. But in response to that, instead of actually dealing with the substance of those technical criticisms, the proponent's closing submission largely relies on saying that it's anything beyond a very literal interpretation of the minister's direction is out of scope. And I don't think that should be, to use an example, the proponent in closing submission says that the minister does not mandate a particular form of statistical analysis, but choosing the appropriate statistical analysis should be part of best practice scientific study. So it shouldn't be an optional extra. Moving on quickly to the next slide. Dr. Parry also raised, as others have, that there may be an underestimate of the dredging required. I'm not going to go through these figures because they've been raised by many people before, but it is noteworthy that the former manager of dredging for the manager of dredging for the Channel Improvement Program raised this in a report to the inquiry. So it's coming from community groups, environment groups, and somebody who has qualifications in this area. We go to the next slide, please. As mentioned previously by others, there's a concern that LNG carriers won't fit in the Geelong Channel, and there will be pressure to widen and deepen the Geelong Channel. This is from Dr. Parry's report. We go to the next slide, please. Dr. Parry also had some concerns around the trigger values for turbidity in the environment management framework, which he says are far less stringent than for past dredging or in the Victorian dredging guidelines. We go to the next slide. So he recommends using the trigger values of 3 NTU and 6.6 NTU instead of what's currently in there of 12 and 15. And he said in his report that the 12 and 15 figures are not justified. I know that the environment management framework has been marked up now, and there's a different measurement, I believe, in there. So I'm not sure if this is still as relevant as it was when he first made that submission. And if we go to the next slide, I want to take us through the link between navigation studies, dredging and marine ecology impacts, as others have, but just pointing towards some very specific pieces of evidence. So if we go to this slide, this quote here is from the original IAC report. where this issue did come up, and it was acknowledged that dredging volumes could be significantly larger than modelled if a greater amount of dredging is required for safe navigation, as discussed in Geelong Port's withdrawn submission and evidence from Mr. Mannion. Now, the evidence from Mr. Mannion is really important because the IAC panel last time carried it through to the Environment Management Framework, and it's included as a mitigation measure. So if we go to the next slide, this is a mitigation measure in the current framework that the proponent must explicitly consider and respond to the evidence of Dr. Mannion and Dr. Pillay in any further detailed design stages of the project. So that is a requirement of the proponent. If we go to the next slide, please. And then this document from Ports Victoria is significant for a couple of reasons. One is that in the proponent's defence of their approach, they talk about their study program. So I'm referring to their closing submissions. And the proponent says that they've consulted widely with stakeholders, including Ports Victoria, and for that reason, the panel should have confidence in the quality of the work. And now for Ports Victoria to come out and be concerned about the studies undermines that central plank of their argument that the study program is valid and is enough because Ports Victoria and other stakeholders endorsed it. Well, clearly they did not endorse it, and they clearly have concerns about the studies to date. As to the substance of this letter, it does acknowledge that the vessels associated with this project have unique characteristics and exceed the current vessel sizes operating in the port. So if we take the Port Authority at face value, they're saying that LNG tankers will not do not meet the current operating parameters of the Geelong Channel. We go to the next slide. And Ports Victoria has also noted that other project risk assessments in other state jurisdictions, by comparison, have shown that reconfiguration of shipping channels may be necessary to enable the safe navigation of LNG carriers. Now, North Shore Residents Group went through this at the hearings yesterday, but it's just, it's a different, I guess it's a different level of evidence to have that coming from the Port Authority as well. And the next slide, please. And Ports Victoria also makes it quite explicit in a letter to the IAC that any required reconfiguration of shipping channels or manoeuvring basins could have the consequence of increasing the area of environmental impact. So that is a very, very clear link between size of ships for safety navigation studies, dredging and environmental impact coming from Ports Victoria. Now, if we go to the next slide, please. So summing up this link, the navigational studies show the Geelong Channel needs to be deep. If the navigational studies show the Geelong Channel needs to be deepened or widened, further dredging will be required, affecting turbidity, light availability, suspended solids, the amount of material to be dumped, timing and duration of dredging, and all these directly relate to relevant environmental effects. Now, I'm anticipating that the proponent may say that these are out of scope and use the Minister's directions to justify that. However, the Minister's Direction 7 says that the Supplementary EES needs to achieve a sound and effectively integrated body of analysis. And it's good to see that this approach has been taken with the mitigation measures so far, where there was an attempt to have a sound and effectively integrated body of analysis. And I believe that we could take a similar approach to the previous IAC panel, where they looked at the evidence from Dr. Mannion around safety navigation, and they included a mitigation measure that requires the proponent to take that into account. So it would be possible to have another mitigation measure that requires the proponent to take into account the link between navigation studies, dredging and marine ecology impacts at a later design stage of the project. And I think that would be really important because it would give the community some confidence or at least a more public airing of what will be the implications of further dredging to the Geelong Channel for safety and navigation reasons. And the supplementary EES terms of reference for the IAC at point 5E does allow for the IAC to identify any additional mitigation measures or modifications beyond those identified in the supplementary EES. And it also at point F allows us, the IAC, to advise on how those measures and modifications should be implemented through the necessary approvals and consents for the project. So as a bare minimum, I feel like that would be a reasonable mitigation measure to add. I can provide these notes as well, by the way, because it's quite specific. And then as to further recommendations, having looked through some of the hearings and thought about this a little bit more, one recommendation is that we should accept Port Victoria's statement at face value that navigation studies are linked to dredging and marine impacts in some way. And then we should require the proponent to do additional studies into the environmental impact that take into account the navigation, mooring and safety assessment. It's unfortunate that we're in this position. Viva, the proponent did have the chance to release these navigation, mooring and safety assessment studies in advance, and then they could have been integrated into the marine ecology assessment. So we could have had a range of scenarios. We would have been able to see what the dredging would have looked like under different navigation, mooring risk assessments, and then we wouldn't have to go back to doing additional studies. However, they chose not to, and as a result of that, I think it's necessary that there's an additional process to integrate whatever comes out of the navigation, mooring and safety assessment studies with marine ecology impacts. If we go to the next slide. Nobody wants to go through another supplementary EES. It's a burdensome process on the community, but there is a lower tier assessment called an environment report that offers specific that has specific investigations and surveys and could be used in this context. And I'm not sure if it's out of scope for the IAC to recommend such a process. It possibly is, but it would be an appropriate, looking through the ministerial guidelines on environmental assessments, it would be a more appropriate forum for a very specific investigation into the link between navigation, mooring, safety assessments and marine ecology. Next slide, please. This is possibly out of scope, I'm not sure, but you have to decide that. But the reason for an environment report is it's still accredited under the EPBC Act, so it would give an opportunity to fulfil that requirement. And I might skip over the next slide and just go straight to questions, actually. Yeah. Our conclusion. We believe the proponent should be required to do an additional environmental assessment into revised marine ecology impacts, which incorporates any design changes from navigation, mooring and safety assessments requested by Ports Victoria and addresses other concerns of expert witnesses in this inquiry. And as a bare minimum, we believe that the mitigation measures should be updated to include a reference that any navigation safety studies have to be integrated with marine ecology in further design stages of the project, so that we actually, if the channel does have to be deepened or changed, then we understand what the ecological impact of that will be. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. What would be helpful to us is to have some drafting, if you have drafting in mind around what that additional mitigation measure should say.
Yes.
If you could provide that to us. We've got a process under our directions for parties to put drafting comments in after they see the proponent's final version of the mitigation measures.
Okay.
So that would be very useful to us.
Yes.
I'll just see whether we have any questions. Any questions from Dr. Briscoe?
Yes, a couple of questions. Thank you for the presentation. And I'll just wait for the echo to stop.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
There's just an echo at Dr. Briscoe's end. There's no echo at our end, so I'm not sure what's causing that echo, but some of our submitters yesterday mentioned the same thing.
Yep. I'll try again. That's better. Someone must have muted themselves. I just wanted to ask you, first of all, did you listen to the evidence provided by Dr. Wallace and Dr. Edmonds, including the cross-examinations?
I read the expert witness statements and then read Viva's closing submissions and looked at the presentation slides. I didn't listen to the hearings because over the summer break I didn't have time to do so, but I assumed that the proponent's closing submission included the key points from cross-examination. And if not, I'd really love to hear the key points from cross-examination. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I trust then Dr. Parry didn't listen to the evidence either then.
No, Dr. Parry's not available. That's why we had to attach. And it's unfortunate that we had to do that, but yeah, it is difficult doing this over the summer break.
Understand that. And just a question about the reference sites where you basically made the comment that the Bellarine sites were not directly comparable and neither was Avalon Beach. I guess you told us what sites are inappropriate. Did you, or based on the information from Dr. Parry, are there any sites that you're aware of that would be better sites for comparison?
Unfortunately, his report didn't give those sites, no.
Okay, and his report or your presentation made a point about the seagrass at the Bellarine sites perhaps being more variable than it might be in Corio Bay. Are there? I guess at one level the Dr. Wallace's report and the technical appendix basically illustrates the point about seagrass variability. Are there any instances that are known to you or sort of from the evidence of Dr. Parry where seagrass is really not very variable, it's very constant in a kind of embayment environment comparable to Corio Bay?
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the echo. Sorry, could you?
Yeah, no, the echo too. No, I'm just asking the question about, I guess you've made the comment that the Bellarine sites, the seagrass is highly variable. And I guess, and as part of that, were you making the point that seagrass might be, I guess, much less variable in Corio Bay?
Let me just check the notes. Yes, he's making the point that the comparison sites, so that those ones on the northeastern shores of the Bellarine Peninsula, show greater interannual variation in abundance than would be expected in Corio Bay.
Okay, but he doesn't provide any further information about why there would be less variation expected, or any sort of alternative sites that mightn't be the ones cited there that might have lesser variability.
His argument for that is that the sites to the northeast of the Bellarine Peninsula have nitrogen coming from the Western treatment plant, and also they are not enclosed embayments. So there's more, I guess, fluctuation in nitrogen availability compared with a closed embayment where you have more of a closed ecosystem, and the nitrogen sources within that ecosystem are from microbes attached to the seagrass and from things like swans, grass leaves, and detaching the leaves, which stay within the embayment, break down and keep the nitrogen within the system. So that's why he says they're very different systems.
Understand that. Okay, thank you.
O'Neill has a question for you as well.
Thank you. Thanks for your submissions and the effort you've gone to.
Thanks.
As you've well highlighted today, Dr. Parry's report identifies a number of what he considers to be deficiencies in the further assessments undertaken in the EES. Did you consider putting those opinions to the proponent's expert witness for their response?
No, because Dr. Parry is not available for this hearing. Oh, as in me, did I do it?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't available over the summer break.
Thank you. In reviewing the report, can you highlight any findings of Dr. Parry that identify that the project will have unacceptable impacts? So there's a lot of commentary and observations about deficiencies in the assessment, but I couldn't find any observations, opinions about the project having unacceptable impacts. Do you have a comment?
Now, I do have a comment on this, and I noted that that this was a key point in the proponent's closing submissions. My way of thinking about this is, in order to assess whether something has unacceptable or acceptable impacts, you need to be confident in the information that has been provided. If the assumptions, the design and the statistical tests going into the studies are inadequate or flawed, then it's impossible to be confident in the information. And so it's a two-stage process. You have to first assess whether the scientific studies are adequate. If they are not adequate, you cannot make that decision on unacceptable or acceptable impacts. If they are adequate, then you can move to the next stage and make the decision on acceptable or unacceptable impacts. And that's probably why the experts have approached it in this way, because the first question is always, is this study adequate? Do we have confidence, a high level of confidence in this study? And then they can assess the information. So I assume that's why experts have gone down that route, because they don't have confidence in the study.
I'm not meaning to pressure. Am I right in my conclusion that the report doesn't actually identify any deficiencies, any negative impacts of the project outside of the process and extent of the investigations undertaken? Were there any negative impacts identified in his work?
The report was a review of the quality of the science. The report was not we did not ask Dr. Parry to come to an opinion on whether the project was acceptable or unacceptable. That was not the requirement that when we briefed him on, can you please cross-reference minister's directions and the EES, and is there, can you review this as a peer reviewer would? It wasn't, do you find this, in your opinion, to be acceptable or unacceptable? Yep. And that's because we felt that was beyond the scope of it was a peer review, and he wasn't as available as other experts over the summer break. So we didn't want to burden him with going
totally
into
understood.
that. Yeah. It's also worth pointing out that the experts who are given the environment effects statement to review, there's been 12 months of study or more that's gone into the environment effects statement, and those experts have to review it within a very short period of time ahead of an inquiry like this. So they're not able to go out and do their own independent testing. They have to look at the assumptions that the proponent has given to its expert witnesses, and if they question those assumptions, then that's totally a valid approach, because any assumptions will influence the output of a study. So I can see how the proponent is trying to argue that because no expert has said there are unacceptable environmental impacts, therefore there are no environmental impacts. But the experts are still at stage one of assessing whether the study is adequate. And if the study is not adequate, they can't proceed to stage two. And this is my opinion. Obviously, I'm a submitter, I'm not an expert. And so, yeah, obviously, different parties will have different opinions.
It's very useful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for your submissions and for the time taken to come and present to us today.
Thank you.
Do we have Mr. Patterson in the room? Hello, Mr. Patterson.
Good morning. I just thank you all for the opportunity to speak this morning. My name is Robert Patterson. I'm a resident of Geelong. I live in the Bellarine Peninsula. I have a number of family members who are very concerned about increasing pollution from burning gas. They, like so many, are not here today, and like a look at the room, they're at work. Burning natural gas, methane, along with the unpreventable methane leakage from these facilities are causing our climate to change and have resulted in ever-increasing CO2 levels and rising temperatures. It is very disappointing that
Are you having trouble hearing? If you could just speak into the microphone a bit better so that people at the back of the room are able to hear your submissions.
Thank you. Is that better?
Is that okay?
Is that better there now?
Or yeah.
Thank you very much. It is very disappointing that I need to submit again to this committee the previous submissions from me, together with submissions of thousands of people, are very much against this development based on the science of climate. Environmental damage is growing. This Viva gas development goes against what the larger community believes is the right approach for our future energy needs. Burning gas is altering our climate, our air quality and our environment. It is increasing global temperatures. The global gas terminal must be stopped. The Victorian government has good plans, increasing renewables, reducing household gas, stopping gas connections to build new building estates. This is the way to go. We must retire gas completely and move towards renewable energy. Climate change is occurring at a rate much faster than anticipated by many global authorities. We have, for the first time in 2024, passed 1.5 degrees of temperature increase, an increase that we've been told by the United Nations, etc., must not be passed. Its impact can be devastating and include extreme and changing weather patterns and rising sea temperatures. It will also provoke mass migration that will lead to global instability and wars. Climate change is becoming a massive infrastructure problem for the City of Geelong, Victoria and all Australians. For example, insurance costs to everyone are accelerating. All levels of government must immediately, at every opportunity, reduce the use of gas. The Viva gas terminal would import enormous amounts of gas for many years to come, if and when established, and be responsible for thousands of tonnes of carbon pollution every year. This proposal will lock in higher gas use for decades and be inconsistent with Victoria and Australia's climate targets. Smarter alternatives is government action to help people switch to efficient electrical appliances like reverse cycle air conditioning for heating instead of expensive imported gas. Other issues which are concerning with the proposed gas terminal: the safety of thousands of residents that live within the danger zone, threats to marine environment from dredging. I've got in here that there's kilometres of the approach of the channel to the Corio Bay will need to be widened and deepened. I think this has been covered quite clearly this morning. And this has not been properly addressed within the Viva gas submission. So we've got no way of knowing. If we don't know how much is going to be dug, we can't then work out or estimate the damage that will occur. Let me finish by saying the Californian fires are a wake-up call for this inquiry, for this state government and the larger community. Insurance premiums are going to go through the roof. It is called climate change, induced by climate change. There are clearly a very large climate change gaps in the Victorian framework. when assessing projects like Viva and the continuing increase in use of gas. Laws need to be upgraded to reflect our climate change. We live in a democracy. Thousands of Geelong people are participating to stop this Viva gas project. Unfortunately, they can't be here this morning. They're at work. Over 96% of submissions to this inquiry are against this project. Has the Minister met with Geelong people in Geelong on this proposal? On a personal note, I know the committee has guidelines and have their hands tied somewhat. But I ask that every committee member and the Minister of Planning give considerable thought that we continue on the present course. Tipping points will be passed. Permafrost thawing cannot be reversed. Himalayas glaciers will be lost. Millions of people will be affected, with millions of people on the move. And yes, Geelong will be caught up in the climate disaster train coming our way. All we ask and need from committees like yours across Australia is to lead your community with the ministers and to have backbone. No to Viva gas, no to gas terminal. If the Minister of Planning, Sonia Kilkenny, wants us to believe in democracy, then we have in Geelong, with our submissions, surely voted no gas terminal. This project will not be approved and has or has the democratic process in Geelong failed us? Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for your submissions and for coming along and presenting them to us today. Any questions? Mr. Patterson, any questions from Member Briscoe? No. Thank you for your submission.
It's amazing, not one question. Thank you.
Okay, is Melinda Nutting available? Is Ms. Nutting on the line? Okay, is there anyone else who's scheduled to present later in the day who might want to? Hello? Could you just introduce yourself, please? Who are you?
I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
So my name's Chris Halpin, and I was scheduled for 3:30 this afternoon, but if I can deliver my presentation now, I'd much appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. So as I said, my name is Christopher Halpin. I initially trained as an agricultural scientist with a research background in nutritional biochemistry. I retired as Regional Manager, Northwest Victoria in the Department of Natural Resources and Environment, where my responsibilities at the time included presenting the department's response to the ill-fated Nawinji toxic waste facility, if your memory goes back that far. So I do have some experience in environmental policy matters and environmental impact statements. I've now lived in Wathaurong country for 11 years and maintain a keen interest in local environmental issues. I'm also a keen cyclist and an active member of the Geelong Touring Cyclist. There's 140 of us and we regularly schedule rides from Geelong along the Corio Bay foreshore, along Hobbles Creek, through Lara to the Uyangs. Most of it entirely off busy roads and on trails. We regard this trail as one of Geelong's finest recreational assets. And personally, I was gobsmacked to learn of the Viva gas terminal and piping proposal. I will confess I'm still a small gas user. My wife and I renovated an older house after arriving in Geelong and installed gas and electric appliances, which was state of the art at the time. We installed solar panels when Scott Morrison took a lump of coal into our federal parliament. Recently, I was able to replace an ageing petrol-powered car with an electric vehicle after a significant price drop. I increasingly appreciate that gas usage needs to be phased out as soon as possible, and I'm quite supportive of the current state and federal government's timelines for achieving net zero. As such, I firmly believe this Viva proposal needs to be rejected. It really is a lazy policy option to the real issue of looming gas shortages. There are other options. The proposal will have unacceptable marine, environmental and community safety impacts. Proposed increases to carbon emissions and expected losses from transport and rehandling of this gas are totally unacceptable. And finally, it is my belief that this proposal will create a visual disaster for Geelong's prime waterfront amenity areas, tourism and associated struggling businesses. I personally believe a huge pressurised floating gas terminal, in effect what I would have called an unexploded bomb the size of Luna Park, in our beautiful Corio Bay will be an eyesore and a constant reminder of the folly of this proposal. Corio Bay is a very shallow waterway, as my great-grandfather found when he was deposited at Point Henry in 1850s. The current shipping channels require constant maintenance. I am particularly concerned to learn that the proposed shipping requirements to feed the floating terminal will likely require much further dredging than has been allowed for in the marine impact statement. This will inevitably impact on alternate users, recreational fishing and a marine environment that is only now beginning to recover from industrial impacts. Hubbles Creek Corio Bay interface embraces a unique environmental niche, and together they represent a significant environmental asset to Geelong and the state of Victoria. I have been around long enough to know that very few people are qualified to comment on environmental impact documentation. I trust that the panel will give fair consideration to the precautionary principle and again reject what are apparently rushed and hotly contested reports. I believe the proposed facility and associated works are unacceptably close to neighbouring community housing. Impacts on nearby tourism, recreational and educational facilities have been rejected, as have been those on neighbouring Ramsar protected wetlands. I also understood the previous panel inquiry was informed of the proponent's questionable safety record within its current facility. It takes little imagination these days to foresee this project becoming future potential as a terrorist target in a troubled world. There are real alternatives to this proposal, as provided by the Getting Off Gas Coalition, that can and will significantly address future gas demand across Victoria, as well as providing much improved employment prospects, particularly for this area. To me, it just doesn't make any sense to ship what will inevitably be Australian gas from one pipe network to repressurise it and then inject it back into the other end of this pipe network in Geelong at enormous expense, risk and with expected losses. I thank you for this opportunity to express my view as a local resident, a keen cyclist and as a concerned citizen, but most importantly, as a concerned grandparent. I trust that you will assist me to look my grandchildren in the eye and conclude that this proposal is too risky, unnecessary, and that we owe our future generations better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halpin. Thanks for coming along and presenting to us today.
Thank you for your time.
Just check any questions. No questions from Dr. Briscoe? No, thank you. Thanks for your time. Okay, Ms. Nutting, we can see you on the line there. If you just take yourself off mute.
Yeah, sorry, I just joined. I just need to get my paper. It's right behind me.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so you let me know when you're ready.
We're ready when you are.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm submitted a written document, but I'm just going to really refer to that again and acknowledge that the appreciation for being able to speak today, and I know it's only 5 minutes. So I'm a 60-year-old resident of Ocean Grove, and I'm a member of several community environment organisations, one being Geelong Sustainability, another being the Australian Conservation Foundation, and the other being Parents for Climate Action. So I aim to be informed by scientific and objective information. So I moved to this region from Melbourne close to 20 years ago because I was enamoured with the natural environment of the region, from Geelong and Corio Bay to the You Yangs and the Bellarine Peninsula, and that believe we're truly blessed to have such a plethora of natural environments to enjoy, but that's a privilege to be able to enjoy it by living here. I believe it's very important going forward to look at the climate crisis and the global impact of decision making. So I'll speak to that. I just wanted to flag I have a grad dip in environmental management, a grad dip in education, and a grad dip in family dispute resolution practice. My privilege in education reinforces to me the responsibility to do all I can, but to urge decision makers to do all that can be done to rapidly transition away from a fossil fuel based economy, and that those decision makers who speak in international, national and more state and local forums continue to indicate that there are policies and even legislation about doing what we can to in some way mitigate the climate crisis. But decision making at this level today, or for this process, should be integrated with that. Otherwise, we are leaving our children to grapple with the impact of global catastrophic climate disasters. So really what I'm asking is that the decision makers, whilst must follow due process, do duly consider that these are vital decisions for the future. So my points are that that in 2023, when the first environment statement for this project was put forward, that there were serious deficiencies, which now, as a result of that, Viva Energy was asked to provide additional data. However, there is in their data that they've provided serious inadequacies that I think are very concerning. Insufficient baseline monitoring, including insufficient details on chlorine plumes and marine surveys that were not carried out over a full annual time period to account for different species life cycles and seasonal variability, and also not good monitoring on dredging impacts and on seagrass, so not adequate and requiring further assessment. The science is highly subjective and does not confirm the existing biodiversity values and the impacts of this project on the ecosystem. Very poorly designed field surveys, which we have to wonder if they've been, somewhat deliberately skewed, and not enough surveys to give an accurate representation of baseline knowledge and impact. The air pollution from the burning of the gas, the potential methane leakage, and from dredging has not been rigorously addressed, noting that the data from the EPA monitoring station in South Geelong may not accurately capture the variations in air quality around North Shore. Corio Bay is not an appropriate terminal for appropriate location for a gas terminal. Corio Bay is a unique marine environment. It's different to the broader Port Phillip Bay. So again, needs very specific and in-depth assessment surveys, monitoring prior to any decisions made that will provide better baseline data. And it is home to an internationally significant Ramsar wetland, which is close to the proposed location of this gas terminal. Other points, the terminal site is too close to the 30,000 residents and recreational and commercial bay users, so that's a combined 30,000. LNG ships coming in and out of the bay would dramatically change the feel of Corio Bay in a negative, very negative way, in particular impacting on tourism and the associated tourism economy. The shipping channel is not wide enough to accommodate large LNG tankers if something goes wrong, and Viva Energy has not modelled what would happen if there was an incident or a spill. Viva has not yet released a navigational and safety risk assessment. Impacts to Aboriginal cultural heritage are still unknown, as Viva has not provided a cultural values assessment as directed by the Minister, and I am speaking about when I wrote this submission in October 24, so it was as of at that time. Gas is a polluting fossil fuel. The Viva Energy gas terminal would import enormous amounts, being responsible for 600,000 tonnes of carbon pollution each year. Locking in high gas use by supply of gas, even if it is, whether it's imported, exported, for decades to go, makes a mockery of Victoria government's so-called climate targets. The alternative to gas is what the Victorian government should be prioritising, including people to switch to efficient electric appliances instead of expensive imported gas. Dredging could be much larger than has been estimated by Viva. The monitoring dredging impacts of Viva's proposal is not consistent with the Victorian dredging guidelines. The channel is not deep enough for a typical LNG ship and will need to be dredged. A rival LNG company, Vopak, rejected Corio Bay as a location for a gas import terminal due to concerns, cost/concerns about, being fined for significant dredging and marine impacts. And as I said, the information I've just put forward is based on what I believe to be or understood to be accurate at the time I submitted it in October. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for yours. Thanks for your submission and for coming along and presenting to us today. I'll just check that we have no questions.
No.
Nope. Thanks very much, Ms. Nutting.
I'll log off. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think that's all our morning submitters. So we'll break now, unless there's anyone else here in the audience who has a 5-minute submission this afternoon who wants to present early. Nope. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll resume at 11:40. All right, next up we have the ACF Geelong community, Mr. Chomley. Now we have a PowerPoint presentation that you circulated yesterday.
Yes, I will not be using that today.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to speak from notes. I'm not expert in the use of PowerPoint presentations, so I feel comfortable.
But you'd still like us to consider your PowerPoint presentation as part of the
yes,
material?
we just put that in there. If we have to refer to it, that's maybe
Sure.
required.
Okay.
So good morning, panel and attendees. My name's Peter Chumley. I live in Point Lonsdale. I presented to the inquiry in the previous IAC in 2022. And today I'm here on behalf of the Australian Conservation Foundation, Geelong branch, ACF. We just want to start, it's 2.5 years since the first inquiry, and quite a bit has changed in that time. And so we just wanted to reflect on a couple of things that have happened in that time. Firstly, I note that 3 of the panel members have stayed the distance and that's important for the continuity of the process. The Geelong Renewables Not Gas Alliance are particularly pleased with the response to the supplementary inquiry. And we think the quality and number of submissions has been excellent. And it shows that many of the people who submitted in the first instance have stayed the course. And that's not always the case in 2.5 years. Previously, I noted my involvement in a biodiesel business located in northern Victoria. And over 2.5 years, I'm pleased to report that business is still going. And I also wanted to note that Viva are an important partner in that journey. In 2022, we focused on the economic argument against LNG gas terminals, including higher gas prices and the issue of seasonal peak demand and then declining general gas demand. So they're very challenging group of issues that face an LNG terminal. And it's worth noting that in the 2.5 years since that submission, the Squadron Port Kembla LNG terminal has largely been built. But it sits there with no customers and no contracts. Meanwhile, the Victorian government wring their hands as to whether to underwrite such an LNG project. So hence, we believe it remains today that proposed LNG projects are uneconomic and they'll only will proceed if they are underwritten by significant government intervention. ACF does not support the intervention by government to support these projects. The ACF Geelong branch has continued to prosper in the 2.5 years, and we have over 2,000 supporters in the Geelong region. Over the last 2.5 years, we've focused on promoting electrification programs and policies aimed at achieving a just transition away from gas for all households. So that's all I wanted to say about the 2.5 year gap. So now we come to the current hearing, and it was relatively short notice, and we had to move quickly. We're a relatively small volunteer organisation, so we decided to consult widely and have face-to-face meetings with various parties. These include Dr. Greg Parry, who's been referenced today by Environment Victoria. He's also the president of the Swan Bay Environment Association, and Swan Bay has also been referenced today. We've met with VOPAC, Exxon, port authorities, a number of politicians, and a wide cross-section of people within the community. We have submitted those 6 slides that you mentioned, and they're largely contain a similar material to the previous submissions. So I wasn't going to refer to them necessarily today, and I'm not an expert, so you have to be careful with what you say. So we comment today really more as a bit of an overview, because people tend to get lost in the detail, and while the detail is important, you can lose sight of what's happening. So as a result of our face-to-face meetings and our assessment, our simple conclusion is that over the 2.5 years is that the proposed Viva terminal location will not work. The site is located in a backwater at the end of Corio Bay, which is a shallow bay, and it receives minimal tidal flushing. And then the only shipping access is via a single and narrow 30-kilometre shipping channel, which passes close to shore and Geelong residential areas. All these things have been raised previously. So yesterday, after the hearing, we had a Melbourne visitor with us, and we decided to drive to Limeburners Bay as a way of highlighting the issue at hand. So you pass by the woodchip terminal, you pass by the North Shore Beach, and you arrive at Lascelles Wharf, which is one of the major wharf spots. And you look out and you see the litany of yellow, red and green markers which indicate the channel, and you look how close it is. And people say, well, how can you have ships like that going so close to land? So then we were going to go around to Limeburners Bay, but the refinery road was closed, so we had to drive around the back of the refinery, if you like. And we come down to the on the refinery road. You've got the refinery on your right-hand side, the enormous tanks. And it's right next to the road. It's not as if it's kilometres away or anything. And then on your left-hand side, you've got the Geelong Grammar School Equestrian Centre. And there, then, in the shallows of the backwater of Corio Bay, there is a group of swans. I think there would have been 20 swans sitting there eating seagrass, I guess. I'm not sure what they're exactly eating. And my wife and our friend said, well, you should take a photo and put it up on the screen. We didn't do that, but I did think, because my son spoke yesterday, and I did think, what would those, if you put the mask on, what would those swans be thinking when they look out 200 metres away is going to be the great FSRU, or the dredging program that goes prior to that, and there'll be ships coming and going, and it just sort of reinforced to me the reality and perspective of the situation. It just doesn't make sense. And so I just wanted to say that, because I think we can, yeah, as I said. So the seagrass meadows contained in Corio Bay have been referenced many times. Sustainable, self-fixing, they don't need the nitrogen coming from the water treatment plant or the Yarra River. They're the same as what is in Swan Bay, which has a similar sort of environment, shallow, and these seagrass meadows in turn sustain the wider ecosystem, and in the case of Corio Bay, the adjacent Ramsar wetlands and the healthy marine life of Corio Bay. So we contend that the Viva terminal will likely disrupt the Corio Bay ecosystem. The discharge from the FSRU unit will impact the temperature and the quality of the seawater. And there's no tidal flushing. No one ever talks about that, but there is no tidal flushing of any significance. And then dredging of the sea floor results in increased turbidity, suspended solids, and reduced light transmission. Not to mention the immediate destruction of the dredge area being dredged. So the first dredging area is the FSRU zone, equates to 490,000 cubic metres of material. And I attended on Monday, and I noted Mr. Chessel sought to diminish the scale of the dredging by reference to, amongst other things, a 23 million cubic metre project. And I know that project. It included 4 separate projects, and it was done in 2008, and it was done to deepen the channel, the main shipping channel to Melbourne Port, which is to 14 metres. And it's important to understand these metres and cubic metres. So 14 metres depth, so they could handle large container ships, which have become standard. Now, the 23 million cubic metres, 15 million was sand. Basic sand was just moved from one spot to another and probably had minimal impact. And then there were two sites closer to Melbourne where there was contaminated material and that had to be relocated, and that was, problematic, no doubt. And then the fourth area was at the heads of Port Phillip Bay, where they had to to gouge into the rock. And that was controversial then, and it is still controversial now, because it altered flow patterns. It did impact. I think a better reference site than putting up 23 million as though it's some sort of doom and gloom scenario. Putting up the 23 million versus the 490,000. A better reference would have been the 1997-98 Geelong Channel maintenance dredging program, which was 4.5 million cubic metres. But that was over 30 kilometres of channel. So if you want to do a cubic metres per kilometre, you'll find that the 490,000 cubic metres in approximately 500. I allocated 500 metres of space is a far higher concentration of dredging than that reference. So I just want to make that point, because I didn't agree with the comment that it was insignificant. And the interesting thing was that project was managed by Dr. Parry, and he's since retired, but he knows a bit about dredging. The second dredging area is the 30 kilometre shipping channel to allow LNG tankers safe access to the FSRU. Now, the quantity and scale of that dredging program remains unknown, and it's been clearly identified by numerous speakers as an issue. The Viva navigation and safety assessment still has not been presented to the IAC or Ports Victoria, 2.5 years after the issue was raised. Dr. Parry and other shipping experts that we've spoken to agree that the Geelong shipping channel is likely to be too narrow and too shallow to accommodate typical LNG tankers. And the Geelong shipping channel, just to go back to those numbers, 11.9 metres. So the Melbourne channel that they deepened was 14 metres. The Geelong channel, 30 kilometres of it, is 11.9 metres. Now you've got to reference these things to high tide, etc. But they are clearly known. And now Ports Victoria have submitted to the inquiry on the same issue. And that Viva have not submitted the assessment to the inquiry is for us a significant red flag issue, and it's been raised on a number of times. Then I wanted to just touch on the Port of Gladstone. So they had a similar issue with LNG tankers and a shallow channel. They required a new EIS and a 2-year dredging program to go to 13.5 metres. So remember, 14 metres, 13.5 metres, and we're stuck with Geelong only having 11.9 metres. I think, Mr. Norman's presentation earlier in the week, he had more detail around this particular issue, and he even tried to estimate the amount of material on 30 kilometres of, if it's 1.5 metres extra to get to the 13.5 metres, it dwarfs even Mr. Chessel's 23 million metres. So we don't want to go through another EES for this project. And we believe it needs to be addressed now. You know, we don't want to have the same thing as, it was a 2-year dredging program in Gladstone to get to the 13.5 metres. And, you know, I note that Mr. Townsend, you know, I understand planning law and they will lecture the inquiry as to the terms of reference, but there's a reality, an economic impact reality. And I think this issue has been there from the start and it can't be just wiped away or cut out of the terms of reference. And then finally, I read, you know, we read quite a number of the submissions, and we observed that people who swim or fish in the bay understand the issue of turbidity. They don't measure it as NTUs or, you know, what does an NTU mean? And the 500 swimmers who swam in the Moorpannual Park annual swim in February 2024, including my family, would understand the issue of turbidity. On that swim, you swim about 500 metres out to the channel. You don't swim in the channel, but you go right next to it. And on that day, there was a strong easterly wind, which would blow, if you're familiar with the geography and the orientation of Corio Bay, blowing straight into where you start. And the turbidity and the loosened seagrass was significant. And one can only imagine the impact of the extensive dredging program will have on the seafloor and this turbidity. So, in summary, over the 2.5 years since the original IAC review, we've only become more certain that the Viva gas terminal has potential to damage the environment of Corio Bay. The members of the ACF community do not want the project to proceed, and the proposed location, we believe, is simply unsuitable for the use. You know, our recommendations would be that the Port Victoria recent statement is accepted and require the proponent to submit a navigation and safety study, and that it be made public. As to the, you know, I note today that Mr. Foister from Environment Victoria mentions an environment report. I mean, you're getting into areas where we don't claim to be experts, but I think we'd probably support such a step rather than have to go through another inquiry. And so if there's a way, I'm sure that people should be able to find a way to deal with these things. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'm open to any questions or.
Thank you for your time and for you coming along to present to us today. Any questions from Mr. Chomley?
No, your submission was very clear. Thank you.
Member Briscoe, any questions for Mr. Chomley?
None for me. The submission was very clear for me too.
Okay. Thanks for coming along. Okay, next up we have Ms. Boundicow. We can see you on the screen there.
Can you unmute me?
We can hear you. Oh, now you're muted. Ken, are you able to unmute? Just hold tight, Ms. Bandicow. We're just trying to unmute you from our end. Could you just try again, Ms. Bandicow, unmuting yourself off your computer? We can't hear what you're saying. Yeah. Are you able to use Ms. Wood's computer? Yeah. Can you unmute there, Ms. Wood?
Hang on. Mike, am I muted now?
We can,
Yep. Okay, we just need you to turn the volume down on one of the computers. And have one of the computers unmuted. We could hear you a second ago. So just use one computer. Make sure the volume's turned down. Yes,
I
We
think
can
I'm
hear
unmuted. Am I unmuted?
yes.
we can hear you now.
Hallelujah.
Don't touch anything.
You make you silent. I'm on an Apple, so obviously it's a difference.
Okay, so we're ready to go, Ms. Bandicow.
Apologies, obviously. I have a lot of echo. Is that you? Yeah. Hang on now. I still have a lot of. I have a lot of echo, but I just have to live with it. Can you hear me clearly? What happened now?
So if everyone other than you who's online can mute themselves.
Yeah, you need to.
So,
She's out of the meeting. Actually, I might take this.
No, don't.
oh, she's getting an echo.
I'm so sorry. I'm a blind woman, and this new technology is constantly challenging me. Radio, this should be better. No, it's still the same, isn't it? Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay. Well, this is a stressful beginning. The whole situation is stressing me out as it is. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I think it's very important for me as a long-term resident of the city of Greater Geelong to raise my concerns. And I'm so nervous and emotional, I'm quite surprised. I still hear an echo, but I'll just ignore it. Do you have the echo as well?
Loud and clear.
Okay, loud and clear. We'll get the echo loud and clear as well.
Yeah, it is echoing a bit. It is echoing for us online. I noticed the meeting room's not muted.
No, I'm muted again.
That's deliberate, otherwise you won't be able to hear us. We won't be able to talk to you if we're muted. Is there anything
I'm
else?
muted again. I'll do that.
No, you're not muted.
I'm not muted.
Ms. Bandicow, I think we're just going to have to battle on, and I know
Okay.
there's a bit of an echo at your end, but we're hearing you loud and clear.
Oh, that's good. That's awesome. So I'm basing my submission, I'm basically reporting my written submission. I moved to Geelong from Germany about 30 years ago. And Geelong and the Bellarine are my home here. I've lived and worked here for 30 years, and this part of the world is really close to my heart. I've got many friends and a good connection to the land and people living here. And many of my friends and clients live or work close to the proposed site. proposed site of the terminal, and I'm really concerned that this proposed terminal may directly and adversely affect their health and well-being, as well as their safety. We all know that Geelong had a reputation as an unattractive industrial place. This reputation luckily has changed over the last years, and it was so interesting for me to observe the change. When I first moved here, the waterfront was absolutely unattractive. The wool sheds that you're sitting in today were basically abandoned and ghastly. But Geelong's done a great job in developing a beautiful waterfront. Some of the main polluting industries left. And I remember very well that when Alcoa and Ford left, there was great concern that this would be the end of our town. But the opposite is the case. Geelong's continue to thrive. Many, many people have moved here. Other employers have moved here, large employers like TAC and Cover. And this last century approach of placing ugly, polluting, and dangerous industry along the bay or our waterways has been transformed. And the beauty and health of our bay is becoming more and more important to all of us, the residents, and also it's important for our economic development. Seeing Geelong is growing so much and more people are choosing to live here, they should also be able to live in a safe and healthy environment. We've grown so much over the last 30 years and have transformed so much. And Geelong has learned to highlight the natural beauty. And it's my hope that we continue on this path. Gee, I'm emotional. Rather than destroying it by allowing such a large and risky project. This project also clings to outdated energy solutions, but I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. Seeing I'm originally from Germany, and this has meant that many friends and family have come from overseas. And it's been a joy for me to show off my new home. And I would take them to the Geelong waterfront, we'd go on the Ferris wheel, we go for swims in the eastern beach. And I would also take the boats into the bay and take cruises. And I was able to show off the beauty of my new home. I spent a significant birthday celebration there with people from overseas, interstate, and Melbourne. And it's been a joy. Corio Bay is beautiful and vibrant, and it's been recovering, and I would really, really hope that we continue to protect what we have and enjoy it and water and our health and well-being. I'm also a psychologist, and as such, I have to consider the environment people live in for their health and well-being, because we know that the environment contributes to overall health and well-being and mental health in particular. There's overwhelming evidence that nature has a positive impact on mental health and well-being, which also leaves us with a responsibility to take any degradation so we can provide solutions for the rising number of health conditions people are presenting with. Nature and biodiversity improve mental health and well-being and reduce risk factors and reduce the burden of a number of mental health issues. So it's our responsibility also for the mental well-being of the population that we maintain green spaces, blue spaces, street trees, and gardens. Proximity to these spaces is very important for people's well-being. We need to protect our bay from major industrial exploitation and provide a safe and healthy environment for the ever-growing population, as well as the increasing number of mental health conditions people are presenting with. People of all ages, but young people in particular, are presenting with high levels of anxiety. And this anxiety is often associated with fear for the future and climate anxiety. This term climate anxiety didn't exist 30 years ago. But sadly, this is now a reality, and for good reason, I believe. This huge proposed gas terminal in our bay would be a very visible reminder of the production and use of climate-destroying gas every day. And as we all know, there aren't enough mental health practitioners in Geelong or the country in general, and mental health services are under-resourced and overworked. So it is our responsibility to meet the growing demand and provide a beautiful, healthy environment to reduce and mitigate the effects of mental health conditions. I'm also concerned about the environmental impact of the project. It's my understanding that the EPA have not yet completed their assessment. I may be wrong with that. I'm also really concerned, like the speaker before me, about the great likelihood of dredging and the damage that would do, because it appears that the existing average gas ships are much deeper and bigger than the existing channels. So I'm concerned about the damage that would be done to Corio Bay and the marine life, and also particularly the seagrass beds. I understand that another company, a rival company to Viva, has looked at Corio Bay as a possible site and have rejected this location due to significant dredging and marine concerns. So I'm surprised that this doesn't seem to apply for Viva. Seagrass is an important part of our ecosystem. Our coastal vegetation saves carbon way more effectively and longer term than tropical rainforests. In Europe, active steps are undertaken to restore seagrass beds, and they're an incredible tool in the fight against climate change. And here we are looking at a project that places this sensitive ecosystem at risk, possibly destroying and damaging it and leaving long-term negative impact. I just don't understand it. Also, of course, there would be impact on marine life. I'm not a marine biologist, but I'm concerned about the damage the project would be doing to the bay. And then there's, of course, climate change in general. Like all of us, I've witnessed climate change firsthand. I was here when the fires of February 2009 were catastrophic and devastating. Then I was here when the entire East Coast, not the entire, large parts of the East Coast were in flames in the summer 2019, 2020. And luckily the city of Greater Geelong was not burning down, but we did experience significant smoke pollution whenever there was a northerly wind, to a degree that we weren't able to leave our houses because it wasn't deemed safe. That's a real issue. Climate change and the destructive consequences of the use of fossil fuels can no longer be denied, and luckily isn't any longer denied. 2024 was the hottest year on record, nothing to be proud of. We absolutely need to take decisive action now, mainly in the interest of younger generations. I'm an oldie, but I don't know what to say to younger generations. Personally, I have disconnected from gas and have encouraged others to do the same. I was in the lucky position to be able to do this. We all know that gas is a major source of climate pollution. Methane has high global warming potential, and it's a matter of urgency that we reduce our reliance on gas and transition to sustainable energy. One of the things that keeps amazing me is that we've known about the destructive effects of climate change and the burning of fossil fuels for about 40 to 50 years. And here we are in 2025 discussing such a proposal. I believe we need to work together to develop sustainable solutions instead of arguing against each other. Viva is willing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars, and I would expect that they expect a profitable return on their investment. So they have a vested interest in slowing down the transition from gas. And we are spending so much time and energy and money to discuss such a project. We should be using this time and energy and resources to work together and look at sustainable options for our future. Viva is prepared we should be using the resources Viva is prepared to develop this project to work together and continue to develop alternatives. We all know we need to move away from fossil fuels, and any jobs that are created with this project or through this project will only be short to medium term. Hopefully, unless Viva is doing everything they can to make it longer term. And I do wonder what we will say to our children and grandchildren.
Ms. Van der Kuyp, we're running pretty short on time.
Yes,
so
yes.
Just to make sure that the submitters following you have their time that they've requested, we're going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up. I'm close to my end. So it all took so long with anyway, yes, you're right, it's 16 past. So anyway, I wonder what we'll say to our children and grandchildren, knowing full well the catastrophic consequences of the using of fossil fuels. We knew that this would happen, but we allowed it to happen because we weren't willing and able to change and collaborate to find positive outcomes. We let vested interest and established systems dictate the way forward and leave it to the kids to mop up the mess as much as that's possible. I would prefer to turn the ship around and work together. And I urge you to consider the harm and recommend the Minister protect the terminal like they have in Western Port. Thank you for your
Thank you, Ms. Vanderkaal. There's somebody else online who is not.
I can't hear you anymore. I can't hear her anymore.
Have you been muted?
No.
Okay, just 1 minute. What's that? Should be good to go. Can you hear me now, Ms. Wood?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
I might speak on Ricky's computer so it works.
Yes. Okay.
Is that okay? So my name is not Ricky Vanderkaal, but is Dr. Julia Wood. I'm an anaesthetist. Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to present my views on my written submission. But today I'm going into slightly more depth. Today I want to speak to you briefly from 3 positions. Firstly, as a concerned citizen of Greater Geelong. Secondly, as a medical practitioner. And thirdly, as a grandmother. As a concerned citizen of Greater Geelong, I moved here nearly 7 years ago because it is now, but wasn't always, a city of great facilities, especially for the arts, and of much natural beauty and amazing ecology. I particularly love the waterfront redevelopment and beautification, and I often swim and exercise at East Beach. My great nephews also enjoy hanging.
Ms. Wood, if you could just hang on 1 second. We've just lost the audio there. Could you just try saying something again, Ms.
Hello?
Wood? Yeah, that's better. We've got you back.
Great. I don't know what happened there. Sorry. Okay. Yes. So
to us about the beautification works along the foreshore.
Yes, that's right. And then on a sadder note, one of my good friends recently held a memorial service for his son at Cunningham Pier. How would it have been if regular sailings of huge gas tankers were passing by during that? This proposed gas terminal might have been a reasonable proposal in years gone by, I don't think so, but before the closure of a lot of heavy industry and the beautification of this vibrant city of Geelong and its waterfront. But the proposal is now hopelessly outdated and dangerous, both for Geelong and the broader environment. I know everyone's been speaking about seagrass, but I just have a couple of words. Many places around Australia, including Western Australia and in Sydney Harbour itself, now have programs to replant seagrass beds because it is now known to be a very important part of the marine environment. As well as being a natural carbon sink comparable in capacity to terrestrial forests. As a keen snorkeler, I know how important seagrass is for fish and rays to breed and feed because I see it on a regular basis. The shipping channel to Corio is not big or deep enough for safe passage for the large gas tankers proposed, as others have noted, let alone in these days of increasing risk of extreme weather to add to the navigation hazards. Dredging the seagrass is an environmental vandalism. We should also be replanting, as Sydney Harbour is, not dredging. And finally, not enough is known of the consequences of such ecosystem destruction. So secondly, as a health practitioner, I believe that what is good for the planet is by extension good for my patients. I also believe I have a responsibility to extend my advocacy for my patients' health and welfare beyond the surgery or the hospital. So just a couple of sentences of specific information about my anaesthetic practice to set the scene. Anaesthetists are sometimes referred to as gas passers, but I hope this moniker will soon become obsolete too. I have in recent years been able to cease using anaesthetic gases like nitrous oxide and halogenated hydrocarbons altogether in favour of intravenous agents which do not contribute to global warming as anaesthetic gases do. I'm very proud of this achievement as it makes my patients better off in the immediate term as well as globally. So-called natural gas, by the way, calling it natural is a great example of attempted greenwashing, in my opinion, is mostly methane, which is actually related to most anaesthetic gases. They have a similar structure. Methane is a greenhouse gas, approximately 30 times as potent as CO2. So any leakage does not just dissipate, as some have been stating, but then has a large contribution to global warming. That's even before we consider the risk of explosion, which I'm sure others have covered, which would obviously be catastrophic to the environment of Corio and Geelong. Also, on a health level, burning gas for cooking and heating is also a major risk factor for childhood asthma, and much research is beginning to be published to support this statement. I am only one person, but I am also happy to say I have achieved total abolishment of my domestic gas supply and now have a totally electric home, run off renewables whenever possible. I understand that I am in a privileged financial position to do this, but I also believe more could be done politically and financially to facilitate this for more households. Lastly, as a grandparent to a nearly 2-year-old, and at the risk of repeating cliches, what kind of planet will we be leaving to our children and grandchildren if we do not act in a timely fashion against greenhouse emissions from fossil fuels? Responsible, and rightly so. Gas is a dying technology, and its ultimate demise will only be delayed by building this terminal, which will soon be an expensive white elephant. And who will pay for that obsolescence, both financially and environmentally? The gas industry uses circular arguments to justify it. And of course, it's true that we do also need to build more large batteries to ensure energy grid stability. But battery technology is rapidly advancing, as are the number of batteries being built. In conclusion, please, for the sake of my granddaughter, do not allow this soon to be obsolete terminal to be built. Thank you.
Dr. Wood, thanks for your submissions and for coming along and for persevering through the tech challenges we had today. Thank you. Thanks to you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have Mr. Chapman. Is Mr. Chapman? Yes, there you are.
Good afternoon. I thank the panel members for the service they're providing to the community, and I welcome the opportunity to present this afternoon. Warren Chapman, I've been living in Ocean Grove for 42 years. My professional career has been based in the Geelong region. I have a family of 3 children, and our youngest daughter still lives in Geelong region. I have 3 grandchildren in this area. I strongly believe that a priority and propriety of us as citizens is to consider intergenerational equity, and that beholds a lot of responsibilities for us for the future. I think and I believe we must give the future generations the nature that we are experiencing, for their experience to be inspired, for the awe of the biodiversity, and for their health and safety well-being. As the preceding speakers, I too have moved off methane gas and have electrified our property. Being a bit of a grey nomad, you know, I have had the resources to do that. But I do recognise that in the Geelong region, I understand our future northeast development area, where natural gas is not going to be, or methane gas is not necessarily going to be part of the supply to that area. As I've indicated, I have lived here for 40 years. I've been a regular visitor. My family and our grandchildren enjoy Eastern Beach, Corio Bay, fireworks, Christmas tree. You know, it's very important to their life. And we recognise that Corio Bay, Geelong wraps right around Corio Bay. So the northern experience of Corio Bay, the Ramsar wetland, Point Lillis, Avalon, are equally as important to them and to me and to the future. My professional career has been in coastal zone management, that at Ocean Grove on the Barwon River, and that adjoins a Ramsar wetland, high value. So in my professional career, I've been aware of the rising sea levels, the impact of storm surges, you know, diminishing our beaches, the loss of habitat, and then the peril that the barrier sand dune loss as it protects our communities behind. I fully support and endorse the Geelong Renewables Not Gas collective inputs. Personally, I am a member of ACF, the Environment Victoria and Geelong Sustainability, because I believe those people are leading our community in the right direction. The opportunity to present to the previous inquiry. In preparing and looking at other submissions, I do particularly endorse the submission from the ACF Geelong community, which is sort of in volume 3 of the documents. I do not believe that we should import methane gas. We should be substituting gas use with electrifying our homes, and we need, as a community, to expand that. I do recognise that we need, in industrial processes, a level of methane gas, but we can utilise existing sources, not needing to import. Through my professional career, I do recognise the importance of a clean and healthy marine environment. I have learnt and experienced and worked in programs to look to restore and recover waterways. I recognise particularly the recovery of seagrass in cleaner water where there's less turbidity, sunlight, and where it's in that sort of right nutrient balance, not being impacted by pollutants and or temperature changes. I recognise locally the work of the Nature Conservancy, developing those shell reefs on the northern parts of Corio Bay, part of that drive to help restore the natural biodiversity so that the future is better. I have, as others have spoken, I have apprehension around the increased ship movements and the increased size of ships and the potential of works that might need to be done to facilitate those if the project should move forward. I have reservations about our capacity, or the capacity that's been demonstrated to properly recognise management and monitoring of the environmental effects and the hazards that are potentially coming. In recognising that we are not infallible, I recall that large vessel that grounded in Port Phillip Bay on Point Lonsdale Beach, just coming through the heads. You know, so an incident is not unlikely. In my professional career, I've had the opportunity to expand my awareness of Aboriginal cultural heritage and recognise that the works being proposed could create disturbance. I participated in a cultural heritage experience in a coastal conference a number of years ago, and the leader was an Uncle Dave Tornier, then of the Wathaurong Aboriginal Cooperative, and he spoke of the connectivity for the Aboriginal people, about people coming from the northern parts of the country, the state, following rivers and then crossing Corio Bay to come down to ceremonies at Port Arlington. So our present channel cuts through that crossing point that he described. And then we do need to realise that our coastline is only equalised over about the last 5,000 years. So there's a lot of heritage within the area when the sea level was lower that we are unaware of and we can sort of cause harm to. My understanding of the science and the experience that we are having and a threat and a peril for our children is associated with air pollution. We are seeing more incidents of asthma and that type of respiratory illness. So industrialisation is likely to increase that risk, and particularly in the recreational values that we still hope to uphold without being able to use our waterways and our coastline and valuable assets that we have around Corio Bay for those purposes. Within that opportunity to experience nature in Corio Bay and living within Geelong, the issue around the ship movements, the noise and industrial activity and the likes are likely to diminish amenity, and we should really consider seriously our imposition of those aspects into the future. I believe that we should be applying a precautionary principle as paramount, and that the Viva gas terminal is not a project that will support our future. I believe our priority should be to reduce Victoria's use of fossil gas. Our future in a world community is best served by slowing and then the halt of greenhouse gas emissions. And action now in stopping Viva's development of the import terminal is a strong step towards showing our awareness of our responsibilities across the world community. And I do not see that Viva has a social licence to develop the proposed facility due to the impact that it could have on the future opportunities for nature and our survival within the world. We are just part of nature. Yes, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman, for your submissions and for coming along to present. Next up, we have Dr. Van Hewitt.
Thank you very much.
We have a presentation from you as well that you've circulated yesterday. So whenever you're ready. Whenever Ken's ready.
It's up to my tech van. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Sonia Van Hewitt. I'm a research scientist, a visiting academic at Deakin University, and I'm also an industry geologist. And my specialisations are environmental change and sedimentology. And I'm also an Ocean Grove resident, similar to the previous presenter. I visit Geelong a lot, and I converted my 1980s house to completely electricity about 5 years ago, and I utilised a lot of the government bonuses and loans to do that as a single working person. So I just wanted to state that. So, oh, terrific.
Use the right-hand arrow.
Okay, right-hand. You've got to point to me. I've got, my glasses aren't on. Just tell me which one it is. That one there. Thank you very much. Okay. So I want to bring up a couple of things that I noted. So when I was asked to actually read the new supplementary EES, I noted that it was taken from Technical Report A. So I went straight to Technical Report A to read that. And I noted that also in the recent inquiry submissions that Dr. Matt Edmonds actually had a summary of what the directions from the original panel had asked for the Viva Energy and what the omissions or not completed areas are. And that I just want to draw attention again to that table to anyone who hasn't seen that. It's actually quite important in terms of the dredging information, the spoils, seagrass mapping, outcome-based environmental management, which is really something that's a huge omission, bird life, in particular the current sighting of orange-bellied parrots in the area, very important, chemical input, etc. So as a scientist, I go through rigorous sort of processes to be able to write scientific submissions and journal articles. And I also have been an editor. So, of course, I was picking out things that I would have thought would have been obvious to people who were reading this. So first of all is the use of qualitative language. Without any substance, may I add, these are just a whole variety of things I just picked out. There are more in there, but I didn't want to bore you with all my pedantic languages and semantics. But slightly contaminated, well away, at many points, most likely, well away, extremely low concentrations, likely to be higher. None of these have been quantified. So it's qualitative language that has been used without being supported with a quantitative data to be able to support that. There's deflective information in here. So they've mentioned the amount of dredging, but it only covers the project footprint. But they mention historical dredging of large amounts. And they've said that it comes from Point Richards, which is actually, the map you can see there, it's actually to the east of Point Henry. So while they've mentioned the actual channel dredging meant going from Point Richards to Corio Bay, they've only shown on the map the points from Point Henry to Corio Bay. So I find that that's a deflective sort of information that they've provided. They've also got a comparison of the volume for 150 years as being 20 million metres squared. But they're then saying, well, this is a small amount comparative to 150 years of dredging. So you can't compare dredging of 12 months to dredging of 150 years. I also have an asterisk on that metres cubed, sorry, because I want to address that a little bit later on. They've got more deflective information, alternative dredge spoil sites. The quote from the technical report is, other spoil disposal sites are possibly available in Port Phillip Bay. However, travelling further would use more fuel, generate more greenhouse gas and prolong the dredging period with no environmental benefit. I nearly choked when I read will produce more greenhouse gas, considering that it's a greenhouse gas emitting project that they're actually setting up. So I find that that's deflective because it's trying to say, oh, we do it this way and we'll save some greenhouse gas. But in actual fact, the project will produce more greenhouse gas than taking the dredge spoil anywhere else. So I just find that really strange comment. Lack of information. The dredge quantities are for the footprint itself, and I've got a picture here from the technical report, but it assumes that these dredge spoils will go to Point William site. So there is no specific confirmation of where the spoils will go. there's assumptive statements throughout it. So the dredge spoil site will have 400,000 metres cubed of dredge sediment, which is similar to a previous project. But then they've said the comment, thus adding new sediment will not change the situation in the spoil disposal site. But there is no reference to actually doing any research or finding out any data about whether that is the actual case or whether just putting another 500,000 cubic metres of spoil will actually affect that area. So again, the lack of data is really grating on me as a scientist. And again, another comment, the dredging is not expected to have any impact on intertidal seagrasses as they're exposed to high light intensity every low tide. But they want to dredge in spring. And spring not only has a shorter daylight, but it also has at least 40% cloud cover because of the season. So I don't think that that's a valid comment to make about that time. There's assumptive statements. Swans that feed in the seagrass, bless you, swallow water and are exposed to low levels of CPBs. Marine biota are accustomed to brominated compounds and can regulate it. Does that mean it's the swans or does that mean it's marine biota? It's no, and again, that's not quantified because there's no levels of what a low CPB encounters. And I deep dived into this and my really bad chemistry. I don't think there's any safe levels of bromine or any of the other CPBs at all. There's conflicting information. So field investigations indicate that Corio Bay had good water quality. But when I looked at the 2022-2023 Corio Bay EPA catchment water quality, it was only rated as fair because there was the direct influence of river inflow, runoff, stormwater, carrying pollutants, nutrients, heavy metals, etc. So I'm questioning, when did the EES do their water quality sampling? Because that's not shown, what dates and what times, and also how often it was undertaken, because circumstances change. And so they've made a blanket statement that the water quality is good, but the EPA with its more rigorous testing has only rated it as fair. So I find that that's conflicting. Another conflicting statement, 150 years to allow safe ship access to the port with 20 million cubed of spoil. And yet on another part of the technical report, it says 30 million tonnes of spoil has been dredged. So again, there's no way of verifying the last one because there's no citation for that, which is really difficult for me to be able to double check and cross check the information and find out which one is actually accurate. More conflicting information. In 2021 to 2023, the technical report states there was a decrease in the number of sea urchins in the seagrass area of Corio Bay, particularly near the discharge site. And then further on in the technical report, sea urchin numbers are proliferating in the existing refinery plumes. And it's been shown that sea urchins are detrimental to the seagrass beds, but which one is it? Are they going to be proliferating and eating more seagrass, or are they going to be in low numbers like earlier in the... So again, more conflicting data that I can't verify and I can't find information about. Leading statements, the introduction to it, experienced biologists and engineers providing accurate results. That's very presumptive of themselves, and they haven't said who their biologists or engineers are. They haven't stated their names. They've got irrelevant information in it. So in this area about talking about the seagrasses and the sea urchins, they've mentioned about numbers and that the culling of sea urchins in Jawbone, which is at Williamstown, and Ricketts Point in Beaumaris, is somehow going to affect the number of sea urchins in Corio Bay. It's in the same paragraph, and it's inferred that that is something that is actually helping regulate the sea urchins in Corio Bay. I find that also quite odd as a scientist. Limited and poor citations. In seawater, chlorine is rapidly replaced with bromine. Fine, I've got no problem with it. To that sentence, where did the information come from? There is no citation for that. In previous analysis, mussels from Corio Bay show that the levels of CPBs, including all of those chemicals, are in very low levels. No citation. Bromoform occurs naturally in seawater. No citation. Mussels are known to bioaccumulate. No citation. I have no problem with these being accurate in terms of usage in a report, but I really grate that there is no way known that I can verify that that is an accurate statement or whether it's been cherry-picked, because a lot of information in here has been cherry-picked. Finally, as a lecturer, but also as a teacher and as somebody who has had 7 or 8 honours students graduate through me being their supervisor, I would instantly fail them on their referencing. Absolutely disgusting. This is the first page of the reference. So it has, yes, M. Adams, okay, I'll take the last name, but then it's got an L, Lamborak, and then it's got the EES. It's all over the shop. And if I was trying to find a citation within the technical report, I would have to go through the entire reference list to try and find which one they were talking about, because I can't go straight to E or straight to J or straight to M. And to me, that also means that it's trying to be a bit deflective. You know, it's also very poor science. Final statement is that Matt Edmonds mentioned a lot of emissions. And I think it's the emissions that we should be worrying about, the stuff that we haven't had addressed. And the second thing is that if they're producing a report like this and they haven't made it top-notch according to the directions from the panel, then I would wonder about their veracity in terms of running the whole project. Because if their beginnings have so many questions, what happens further down the track when the project goes ahead? And how do we make sure that that doesn't have emissions, wrong information and unverifiable data, in particular with further reporting on the project? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Van Hewitt. Just before you disappear, just check that we have no questions for you. Member Briscoe, did you have any questions for Dr. Van Hewitt?
Just a broader question about it. You've, I guess, made quite a few criticisms of the EES report, but do you also have concerns about the acceptability of the project?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I don't need to go through and restate what most of the professional witnesses and people who have mentioned a lot of data and information. I just have real concerns, not only about the project being in a very, very vulnerable place in Geelong, but also that it's a gas project when Victoria is actually trying to lead itself off gas with the gas, all sorts of gas pathways, trying to get other people working on rentals to get them electrified. So I do find the project is, first of all, unnecessary and unwanted in Geelong, absolutely.
Yeah, and just sorry to follow up on my question. You've criticised the report on the marine environment. Do you have concerns about the acceptability of the effects on the marine environment?
That's an absolute statement, yeah.
Any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you for coming along and presenting to us today. Thanks, Dr. Van Hewitt. Okay, now we have our lunch break, and I think we've had a slight change to the timetable after lunch. Ms. Hunt is no longer able to present. Did we have any update on when we're going to be? So we're back here at 2:10 because we haven't heard from Ms. Camilleri. Oh, all right, we'll resume at 2:10.
Member Keller, can I ask if the school's intending to rely on any written material tomorrow, and if so, whether that's been filed?
Mr. Tobin, have you got an update for us on the filing of the school submission for tomorrow?
No, I've asked for inquiries. You said that to me 3 times on the text. You must have made your inquiries by now, Mr. Tobin. We're entitled to know when you're filing.
Okay.
No, we need to be reading it. I mean, it's an hour now late, and I think I've had 3 times, I'll make inquiries through the text.
Okay, well,
I'd
we
like
might
to know
just
when
check
it will be
in.
filed.
We'll check in when we come back from lunch.
Opponent submissions were served an hour late. Everybody's doing the best they can within the timeframes.
Okay. All right, we'll see you at 2:10. Okay, before we go to our afternoon submitters, did you have any update on when we might anticipate the school submission
Yes,
coming through?
Yes, I do. I'm advised that I was hoping it would be filed by now, but I think they're still formatting or something of the sort. So I think it's going to be a 2:30,
okay.
2:30ish sort of thing. It's certainly imminent, as I'm advised, but as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Now, our first submitter for the afternoon is Susan Camilleri. Is Susan online? Are any of our other afternoon submitters online who might be able to make use of this spot? Mr. Martin?
Hi.
Hi there, how are you?
Not too bad.
Good. If you could take us through your submission now, that would be much appreciated.
Fantastic. There's a bit of echo there. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure what is going on with the echo, but it seems we're not hearing an echo in here, but it seems that those who are listening online might be getting an echo. Ken, is there any? Okay. I think just make a start, Mr. Martin, and hopefully
I'll give it a go and try not to listen to my own voice too much. But so thank you for the opportunity today to present. Really, I just wanted to start by saying that I'm making this submission in my own personal capacity, representing my own views. I am a sustainability professional and have actually worked in the energy sector quite extensively over the last few decades. At the moment, as somebody who works in cryo, in close proximity to the proposed project, I am expressing my strong opposition to the development. I really feel that the supplementary statement fails to adequately address fundamental concerns around environmental impacts, particularly regarding protected wildlife and marine ecosystems, as well as the broader implications for climate change and economic sustainability. I think that these concerns, really spanning the impact on the threatened bird species, the insufficient monitoring attached to it, and also the, I would argue, questionable economic benefits and the failure to provide an adequate environmental rehabilitation assurance as part of it. So I'll just sort of briefly run through a few of my points here today. Obviously, I acknowledge that you've probably heard a few of these arguments already, so thank you for bearing with me and listening through them again. So my first point is really the adequacy of the assessment on protected bird species. I really feel that the assessment is quite deficient in addressing the impacts on threatened and migratory bird species. I went through and had a look just utilising the Delta Nature Kit database, which documented over 100 sightings of near threatened, vulnerable and endangered birds in the area over the last 2 decades. The species that I identify: the Caspian tern, great egret, little eagle, little egret, musk duck, Nankeen night heron, Pacific gull, royal spoonbill, spotted harrier, swift parrot, whiskered tern, and importantly, the white-bellied sea eagle, which is referred to in the documentations as a raptor species. And really, I think the issue that I take really sits in Chapter 4 when we're looking at the white-bellied sea eagle in particular. I know a lot of residents on Avalon Road, Avalon, regularly observe hunting, or these birds hunting in these waters and also nesting as well. And I think that the report really failed to pick up on that. There was a lot of assumptions, but obviously associated with the sort of lack of a detailed monitoring program, sort of missed some of those key points. And I think the real issue that I take is that if under the Victorian regulations, any sort of minor disturbance to this fauna does require a scare authority to control wildlife permit from the conservation regulator, and like even if you're doing any sort of basic tree works. And so when we're talking about the impact on these species, particularly from light pollution, noise disturbance, the impact on prey species as well, they sort of make a lot of assumptions talking about these impacts or potential impacts in isolation, and I just think that it is it's not adequate. It needs a really robust monitoring and more detailed work, particularly looking at how the constant presence of FRSU and LNG carrier visits would impact hunting, breeding, and behaviours of these protected species. And also as well, obviously we're looking at the increased vulnerability during extreme weather events driven by climate change and how that also would impact. So that's sort of my first point, and really, questioning whether or not the conservation regulator has provided a submission or should be consulted just in regards to that, because it is, you've got one sort of part of the Victorian government asking, even if you remove a tree branch, that you have to go out and get a permit. And then, the potential for less than a kilometre away to have, all of this work and this project happening. It is a little bit of a contradiction in my opinion. The second point is really the baseline monitoring, and I do think that it is inadequate. The surveys appear to be fast-tracked, and they really haven't been conducted over a full annual cycle. I think it really needs to account for seasonal variability in species presence and behaviour, the different species life cycles, breeding periods, the seasonal changes in marine ecosystem dynamics, and also looking at the impacts on seagrass in particular. I think and I think this has been identified earlier today. I was listening in, the oversimplification of generic seagrass categorizations, looking at the different conditions depending on the exposure, whether it's east or south, the sort of insufficient consideration for seagrass's role in the nitrogen cycle, and the cumulative impact. And so again, looking at the monitoring, everything is looked at in isolation. So the impact on a species of noise goes up, but these things don't happen in isolation. There's a number of variables, and when all of those variables are all elevating up, and in isolation they might be below a certain threshold, but because you've got all of these different impacts all cumulatively hitting the fauna, what is the impact of that, and the stress that it will put on those species. So that would be my second point. My third point is really just looking at the Ramsar wetland, the protection concerns. Obviously, this is a vital piece of habitat that we need to protect. I think that there are some adequacies in some of the sediment transport modelling, not really accounting for that fine sediment movement, and also really not looking at the worst case scenarios. And I think, if you're looking at everything through a risk lens, looking at the worst case scenario for, what the impact could be. And again, it's that accumulation, a number of, increasing frequency of storms, intensity, climate change, all of these things, what is the worst case that we need to be looking at, and also thinking about Corio Bay, that it is unique, and it is, even though it is, falling within, looking at the sort of the broader Port Phillip Bay, it is its own unique ecosystem, so that needs to be factored in. And so, when you're looking at monitoring, a really robust, at least 12-month monitoring program, I think is really warranted. touching on my fourth point here, which is the climate impact and economic sustainability. And, I think there's been a number of community submitters sharing, sort of similar frustrations, just looking at the fact that, the facility would be responsible for, over 500 million tonnes of carbon pollution annually when you're factoring in those transport emissions. I think it is really a contradiction to the Victorian government's climate targets and Climate Change Act. And, I think if we're looking at it in comparison to, say, the 2022 gas substitution roadmap interim findings showing that all electric homes are, the ones that are saving thousands of dollars annually. If you're looking at the progression to an all-electric future, and it is my sort of firm belief that this facility, if it does get approved, will likely be decommissioned within my working life. It is just a huge amount of wasted resources when we could be moving towards targets that are already really well known and well documented. I also think that the financial assurances around this really need to be embedded, and looking at environmental rehabilitation. My belief that this will be decommissioned within a few decades if it does get approved. I really firmly believe that much like a new mine that's opened up, that a substantial rehabilitation bond should be implemented. And now the cost, particularly if you're looking at seagrass rehabilitation, I think there was a report, there's Bayraktarov, I think it was 2016, was suggested that it was around $100,000 US per hectare for rehabilitation. And so I think we really need to be factoring in, obviously for inflation, you're probably looking at $250,000 to $300,000 Australian a hectare of anything that's been disturbed as a rehabilitation bond for this project, so that the site can be rehabilitated when it is no longer needed, and it will no longer be needed within a few decades. And so that is sort of my firm belief, and it would be great if that could be explored. So yeah, just sort of in closing, a lot of the points that I raised above, impact on protected wildlife, marine ecosystems, the Ramsar wetlands, in particularly the sort of lack of observations on those locally observed white-bellied seagulls, and the inadequate environmental assessments around those cumulative effects and the climate change implications. I think it really should preclude this project from approval. If it does need to go ahead, I really firmly believe that a really, really robust set of rehabilitation bonds need to be put in place, so that when this project is decommissioned within a few decades, that it can be rehabilitated adequately. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Mr. Martin. This morning, one of our other submitters talked about some seagrass replanting efforts that are underway in Sydney Harbour at the moment. Do you have any experience with that type of program?
No, I haven't got any, or the only, as I said, the studies that I have looked at in regards to that, there's one that's been cited, several hundred times, which is Bayraktarov 2016. I can send that through afterwards if you'd like, but that was looking at 2010 numbers, and so that was just over 100,000 US per hectare in 2010. So obviously, looking at the present value of that, you're probably looking at at least 150 US, if not more, a hectare. So, but yeah, I think whatever safeguard. I mean, looking at Resources Vic, that you couldn't just use what they're using for mining in Victoria, because it is significantly more expensive from my knowledge.
Reference to that study would be great if you're able to send that through to us.
Yeah, okay, no problems.
Any further questions?
Yeah, just a couple, Mr. Martin. Thank you for your submission. As you can appreciate, there's a lot of information before us. I am certain I have read some revised and updated provisions, possibly in the EMF, Environmental Management Framework, in response to observations about decommissioning and remediation at back end in response to the IAC's first report. Have you cited that updated material?
I haven't seen any updated material. I went through most of the documents with a control F looking for rehabilitation, reinstatement. I used a couple of different terms and I only found one reference and that was, you know, it was very vague. So if there is updated documentation, would be good to see.
Okay, no, that's fine. In addition to the bullet points you've raised in your written submission to us, that didn't include a reference to the per hectare rate that you cited in your verbal submission this afternoon. Two questions on that. One is I missed the numeric value of that per hectare rate that you commented. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, so I will circulate the study after this, but it was looking at, so it was a study from 2000, so a paper from 2016 that looked at seagrass rehabilitation at just over 100,000 US per hectare.
Sorry, I'm catching up. That's the same conversation you just had with Member Carlisle. I thought it was a different.
No.
I thought it had to do with you're making an observation about remediation also of land-based vegetation.
No, so particularly talking about the marine environment, but obviously if you're talking about there's no gas flowing through any pipes, you're going to remove the pipes, you know, particularly through that that northern plains grassland area, you know, the opportunities potentially for rehabilitation. But yeah, my real interest is sort of rehabilitation on land is a lot easier and a lot, you know, it's a lot cheaper, and there's a lot of unknowns, particularly with the, you know, the range of impacts that could be coming, particularly with, you know, we say we're going to remove this much, but if dredging is wider, if there's more sediment, you know, the impact on photosynthesis and, you know, the broader implications, you know, you really do need to make sure that you have a very robust bond to account for all of that.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry for the confusion.
That's fine.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Martin. Thanks for the time you've put in and coming along to present to us today.
Thanks very much.
Do we have Ms. Cook online? Oh, okay. Claire Weekly, are you online there?
Hello, yes.
Hello.
I'm online. All right.
Thanks
Well,
for
thank
agreeing to come in a little bit early. We're ready to hear from you whenever you're ready.
No problem. Happy to do it sooner rather than later. And yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission today. I'm speaking to oppose Viva's proposed development of the gas import terminal in Corio Bay. I'm not a resident of Geelong and I'm not a regular visitor to Corio Bay, but I think we all have an interest in the proposed development of new fossil fuel infrastructure. And as such, I'm someone who will be impacted by this development, which enables the continued burning of fossil fuels that generate greenhouse gas emissions that worsen the climate and environment in which we all live. Viva's proposed development will have a negative impact on the environment that is wider than the local impacts on marine life, air quality and public safety. But of course, the greenhouse gas emissions released by the proposed development will contribute to the warming of the ocean and atmospheres, so that the marine life of Corio Bay will not only be impacted directly by the building and operation of the facility, but also indirectly by the contributions of the facility to the planetary heating caused by the burning of fossil fuels. And of course, I recognise that this hearing is not to consider the environmental impacts of carbon emissions generated by this project, but it cannot go without comment that building new fossil fuel infrastructure in the midst of the climate crisis is short-sighted and dangerous, and its environmental impacts will linger for generations. My greatest concern in relation to the supplementary environmental effects statement is about the impact of dredging. Submissions from Environment Victoria, the Australian Conservation Foundation, the North Shore Residents Group and others have raised significant and detailed concerns about whether the current shipping is adequate for LNG tankers that would access the import facility. And it seems that the existing channel would be too shallow and too narrow for safe transit by LNG tankers, even after the dredging work proposed by Viva. This increases the risk of grounding of the tankers and makes it more difficult for them to make an emergency departure, increasing risk to public safety and the environment. And so it seems that there is strong evidence that far more dredging will be required in Corio Bay than described in the statement, and the actual amount of dredging required to make a safe channel for the LNG tankers needs to be determined so that the true impact of dredging can be properly assessed. As it currently stands, it seems to me that there is a risk that either the size of the shipping channel be insufficient for safe movement of LNG carriers, or the true amount of dredging required will only become apparent after the project is approved and underway, and will pose a greater risk to the marine environment than described by the supplementary EES. So if the project is approved and it's then determined that additional dredging is required, who will bear the financial and environmental costs of that additional dredging? Will the project still be viable and will it become uneconomic? And if it becomes uneconomic, will it be propped up by taxpayers? And what will the impacts be in the cost and supply of gas that is purportedly needed for Victoria's energy security? So going back to the previous submitter who spoke about the financial implications of this development, will it become a white elephant even before it's been completely operational? So it's obvious to me and many that Viva's proposal does not stack up in terms of greenhouse gas emissions or in its purported aim of addressing Victoria's gas shortage. Indeed, it distracts us from the need for more renewable energy and electrification to avoid the gas shortage. And based on the supplementary EES, there are also serious concerns that Viva is significantly underestimating the amount of dredging required for safe movement of LNG tankers, and that there is a significant risk that if approved, the amount and environmental impact of the dredging would be far greater than described in the supplementary EES. And I ask again, who will ultimately bear the cost for that? I doubt it will be Viva. Thank you for taking the time to hear me today.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Weekly. Any questions from Ms. Weekly?
Very articulate, thank you.
Thanks again for the time you've put in and coming along to present.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay. Do we have Ms. Cook online? Christine Cook? John Godfrey?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Mr. Godfrey. Would you like to present now?
Yeah, I can. Just hang on, turning on a camera so you can see my smiling face. And do I share my slides that I previously uploaded, or can I assume you can see them, or how does this work?
It would be good if you could share screen just so our online, we've got them on our own screens, but just so our online participants are able to see what you're speaking to.
Okay, sure, no problem. Let me futz around with my computer and do just that. Hang on. Sorry, I wasn't quite expecting to be on this early.
Sorry, if you need a couple of minutes, take your time.
Thank you. And that one, share, slideshow. Can you just confirm, because I can't see what you're saying, are you seeing a title slide now?
Yes, we are.
Excellent.
So we're good to go.
Good. Okay, who am I? I'm John Godfrey, Victorian born and resident. Live in Bunyarong land in Cape Patterson, which is down towards Wonthaggi and Inverloch. For those not sure where Cape Patterson is.
Relevant to this inquiry, I'm a retired chemical engineer and I've worked exclusively in oil refining. So I spent 37 years working for Mobil that then became ExxonMobil. Started at Adelaide Refinery, I worked at Altona Refinery, and then worked globally. One of my roles in those times was supervising the tank farms at Altona Refinery, so dealing with shipping going in and out to Gellibrand Pier there. I did the first greenhouse gas reports out of Altona Refinery, and I led teams working there both on energy and process engineering. So I don't claim any real knowledge about LNG per se, but I've got a fair experience with oil refining and energy and refining capital projects in general. As Claire Weekly just eloquently said, put very simply, I think somehow we've got the sequencing for this project hearing wrong. What should have happened is that Viva should have come up with a proposal that adequately addresses the safety requirements of getting an LNG ship into such a terminal and told us how much dredging and where needs to take place, and agreed that with Ports Victoria so that we can then have the appropriate environmental experts and things look at what the impacts are on the environment in Port Phillip Bay. Because right now what we've got is an EES that appears to be valid only if no ship ever brings LNG into the terminal, which is just a very, very odd way of doing things. I worked on the edges. I've worked on shipping projects both at Altona Refinery and at Adelaide Refinery. And the first thing we ever did was use marine experts locally and globally to go, what's required to safely bring a ship in and out of this particular harbour if we're going to increase the size of the ship. And we did that both at Adelaide Refinery and at Altona Refinery. We increased the capacity of the terminals to receive large crude ships. And our major concern was draft and channel width. It seems odd, peculiar, insane, something, whatever, that we're talking about trying to bring LNG ships down a channel that is way too narrow and in large portions too shallow, and there's no contingency for emergencies, etc. So, and I believe, and Ports Victoria have just sent you a letter to this effect as well, saying, show us a proposal that tells us, shows you can do this safely, and then we've got something to look at. And I'm curious as to why governments in Australia keep on making this mistake. The Gladstone LNG terminal had to undergo significant extra dredging. And Tasmania, I mean, poor Tasmanians, they've got a survey ship that can't go under the Tasman Bridge, which means it's got to refuel up the north coast. And the Tasmanian ferries are sitting in berths in Scotland and Finland waiting for their harbour to be brought up to scratch. So if you haven't ever been on a very, very large ship, and I've been lucky enough to do that while they're in harbour, it's easy to underestimate just how damn big these things are and how much space they need to manoeuvre safely. So Ports Victoria wrote to Ms. Carlisle on the 10th of January. I noticed the document said 2024, but I assume it was actually sent this year. And in brief summary, I've got the slides there. The North Shore Residents Group has put together, and I separately researched, I went back to the Sandia and the SICTO documents that I could find, and everything they're saying makes absolute sense from my experience with refining safety and projects, and Martin Mannion and Dr. Annan Pillay. I listened to their presentations in the original hearings. We need vessel exclusion zones. We need emergency anchorage. ships have suffered accidents. We need to see a firm proposal from Viva which says how much dredging is really required in order to conduct these operations safely before we can assess the environmental impacts in Port Phillip Bay. And I think I'll leave it there. It's that simple. We put the cart before the horse.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Godfrey, for that very clear submission. Any questions from you?
No.
O'Neill?
No, thank you.
None from me also. Thanks, and thanks for agreeing to bump yourself up the list a little bit.
That's all right. No problem. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
We'll just check in again whether we've got Ms. Cook online. Christine Cook. Oh, I think she is online, getting the thumbs up from Ken.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. If you could just turn your camera on so we're able to see you.
You got me now.
Hello.
Thanks. Hi, and I'm sorry about that. My old devices were taking too long to download the new version of Microsoft Teams. I went from one to the other, so I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
So look, thank you for putting up with me coming late and allowing me the opportunity to speak today and to put in submissions in the past. I'm a grandmother, a semi-retired business manager. I have a holiday home on the Bellarine Peninsula. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert. I'm just a grandmother who is really concerned. And you will hear heaps and heaps of amazing information from experts who know. I'm just speaking because I'm good at being a mouth. I see myself as a mouth for many thousands and thousands of other people who either don't understand, don't know, or aren't silly enough to put their hand up to speak up, but they know that they care. So that's who I'm speaking for. And I thank you for the opportunity to feel like I'm doing my bit. So I grew up and lived pretty much my whole life, 70 out of 73 years in the West. I'm involved in a number of greening groups around the western suburbs of Melbourne, beautifying the rivers, the creeks and the parks in various parts of the West. And there's been massive work, and it is much more beautiful than it was when I was a child growing up in similar suburbs on this side of town. In the current climate, it is lunacy to proceed with this project. Scientists have been advising us for decades, no more fossil fuels, have been warned about increasing disasters, and they're happening now, only they're happening faster, sooner, and more intensively than even the scientists predicted. This is stuff that I think everybody knows, but I'm saying it because I think it needs to be reiterated regularly. The state government have spent a great deal of money and time to clean up, repair and restore Corio Bay and Port Phillip Bay in recent years, and they are doing good work in doing that. But this project flies in the face of work that's been done and ignores advice from eminent scientists. In particular, and I'm sorry if you hear the tapping, it's my grandchildren background bouncing a ball, I'm sorry about that. In particular, the dredging in the area surrounding the FSRU, and more importantly, and I think this is what the person before me was talking about, the likely dredging of the 30-kilometre Geelong Channel. They're terrible, and they're going to create a turbidity, diminution of the light and oxygen in the water surrounding it, and in addition, the water discharge from the FSRU is awful. They're all serious problems. It's unlikely also that this project will be completed by the proposed 2028 date. So its effective use will likely be pushed back to some later dates. And these hopefully will be at late enough, or sorry, this sounds really cynical, but you know, it's not very long before we are going to be not so dependent on fossil fuels, and this project will then be mostly a waste. That's how I hope it turns out anyway. But what it will result in is the destruction of habitat and environment, and will just be another disastrous waste on our planet. So for the sake of all our grandchildren and all those who do or will live in or around Corio Bay and Port Phillip Bay, please reject this. We've already done too much damage. And as a proud Westie, I just want to finish up and say that so many dirty projects end up in the West, and it's really not fair. And the reality is that the western suburbs of Melbourne are the fastest growing in terms of population of any place in Australia. And I think we have to consider that the people in the West deserve something better. I just think this is a really foolish project. And like I said, I'm not an expert and I don't have the science to back me, but I think there are plenty of people who are doing that. So thank you for the opportunity. And I just wish you all lots of good luck, because this is a huge task that you've undertaken that you've got to deal with. So I keep my fingers crossed to come out with the right answers. Sorry, I can't. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Just thanking you for your submission.
Okay, thank you for letting me do it.
Any questions? No. No. Thanks, Ms. Cook.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more submitter today, which is the Southern Ocean Protection Embassy Collective. Georgia, have you heard from? No, we haven't heard from them. They're not due to present until 3:40, so I think we're looking at a fairly extended afternoon break. Georgia, if you do manage to hear from them and they're ready to present a bit early, perhaps don't go too far, and we'll reconvene a bit earlier if we can. Okay, thank you. Okay. Do we have anyone from Southern Ocean Protection Embassy Collective on the line? Not yet. We'll give them a couple of minutes.
Hi, Chair. It's Amy here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Georgia's located them and she's just coming back now.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Ms. Bundle. We've got a presentation from you, so we'll just give you a moment if you want to set that up and screen share, or is Ken ready? Yeah? Okay. Well, we're ready when you are.
There's a glass of water just there if you want to take a...
Okay. I'd just like to start by introducing myself and paying my respects to the Wathaurong Nation and the Wathaurong speaking people. And yeah, I'm here to represent my connection to this country and speak for some of the concerns that we have for country and sea country. Yeah, my name is Yaren. I come from Gunditj Mara, Djapurong and Wathaurong countries in Victoria. and other nations that extend interstate on my other family lines. And yeah, I'd just like to speak about the connection to Aboriginal country, Aboriginal cultural heritage, our place of belonging on this country, and quickly a few little briefs about our connection to some of the things I put in my written submission about the mussels and the seagrass and some of the women's business that's connected to that. And then, yeah, a little presentation to show you at the end, which is something else that, yeah, mob are really proud of, and it's something really important to flag for this hearing. So, yeah, I'd just like to start by honouring that Wari, that sea country, Aboriginal spiritual connection extends through our physical beings and our spiritual connections to our sacred country, and that is defined by us in land, sky and sea. And we are our country. And so I have that grandfather bloodline connection to this country, it being a patrilineal nation, proud Aboriginal nation. And yeah, I'm also here on behalf of SOPEC, which is the Southern Ocean Protection Embassy Collective, which was created to support mob in protection of their sea country, and our connection educate the wider community and public about and these formal processes about our connection to country, our place of belonging, and yeah, the really significant underwater cultural heritage that extends into the bay here, and the relevance of, you know, protecting that is really significant to some of us cultural women and those very old oral connections through our culture, but also some of the older records that support some of what I'm about to say. So our mussels, our connection to the mussels, a lot of people would know about the Port Arlington mussels and the seafood industry that is connected to that, and a lot of people, you know, it's beautiful seafood. A lot of people know about where those mussels come from, but they don't know whose country they come from, and they don't know the significant cultural resource that they are and once were as well, current relevance to the people and the reclamation and revival of culture, and that includes the protection of our cultural heritage. So that's a really important aspect for the women and children who had that direct connection, walking the shallows of that country and maintaining ocean farming. We talk about a lot of agricultural practices for the land and how my people had cultural burning and other eel aquaculture systems and things for the land, but it's not as widely known about the oceanic aquaculture systems that we had, and they extend all the way around Australia. And so Corio Bay is a really significant example of the underwater cultural heritage, but how that interconnects with women's business, our cultural business, and how we maintain care of our country, so that we never took too much. We had this reciprocal relationship that always gave back to country and provided for us. And so those places where we can, us cultural people with an eye for what we're looking for, can see that cultural heritage there plain as day today. We don't need to look further beyond scientific research to see that, but the scientific research actually supports some of what we know to be there. So that includes the seagrass beds, the significance of what the seagrass means to this bay and this country, Wallarong country. And that was also something that was maintained and harvested by the women. And this whole bay was a nursery area. So when we're looking at the shape of country, we look at how the country was before colonisation and how it's progressively changed over time and how it is now. And then we look at these future developments, and we know that any span of that, large or small, is going to do major damage to significant cultural heritage that goes into the sea country. And so an example of that is the dredging. And if you look at the shape of the bay, the Corio Bay, and then the outer bay, which I'm very sure has traditional names to those places and the bays that connect to the wider Port Phillip Bay and the Dreamings that connect up the Kulin Nation. So it's not this separate thing on the side, it's part of the Kulin Nation Dreaming. And as well as it being a nursery place and a place of women's business and a major resource of food and survival, it's a place of significant songline. So that includes something that is really close to me as well, and a dreaming that I'm connected to is the Kuntabul Yakanij, which is the whale songline and the whale dreaming, and it's the Kuntabul is the word for southern right whale, and that's our Gunich Mara word, but that songline extends into this bay here, and the outer bay and Port Phillip as well. So there's all of this what is labelled as intangible cultural heritage, and we don't see it like that. We see it as one whole that we are intrinsically a part of. And so the damage that's done to country is done to us as well. So back to the shape of the bay, the land, anyone can look up on Google Maps where the shallow waters are in the bay, and you can see it quite clearly. That channel that is proposed to be dredged and the shallow waters that cross that section of the bay, that was actually a major cultural heritage site, and not a lot of people really know that or understand that, and the dredging alone will destroy that, but also, as I understand it, darken the waters with the dredging. That will also affect the mussels and the seagrass. So yeah, that's the basis of, you know, my concerns, and for SOPEC to be able to support the Wallarong people to have that voice and be considered as a very significant stakeholder in anything going ahead on country in the future, but especially something that is setting up a bigger picture for the Southern Ocean in terms of gas exploration and extraction. And that's something that, you know, we've proven several times along this whole coastline, that we, the community says no to seismic blasting and searching for new gas. And our sea countries are the ones that will be directly affected by new gas exploration projects that this proposed hub will support. So we're really dead against it. It's not something about giving back to country or community. It's going to destroy it, and it's going to destroy the recreational fishing that people do here. But it's also going to destroy our intangible and tangible cultural heritage. And I think that alone should be enough to reassess all the environmental protection processes and statements that are related to this until not only do the local traditional custodians, but the wider Victorian Aboriginal community in a time of treaty to be able to contribute to how we move forward. And if we're not listened to in these formal processes, then to some of us that is seen as a direct, contribution to cultural genocide on our people, different forms of it. So that's really important to flag and have on record that, if the state government are going to go forward with this, that's what they're supporting. And we should have every right to be able to contribute to a better contribution that's going to support the local community and the coast that we're all here and we all love, and that sustains this, a lot of the local economy. So it's really important. But from a cultural perspective, another thing that we have as a First Nations person that carries sea country dreaming, something else that we have established for protection of sea country because we haven't been listened to in the past. And we have some of those solutions about moving forward, and we feel like that there's too much talk and processes about this in the climate emergency, and there's not enough action. So we have taken it upon ourselves as whale dreaming people to call on the wider national community of saltwater nations, First Nations, that stand for protection of sea country, but also stand for the major support of the communities that they come from, and that includes everybody. In our culture, everyone has a place of belonging. In a capitalist system where at the bottom we're second-class citizens in our own country, and we need that to change. And so we've created a self-determined group that will advocate the government for more protection, marine sanctuaries, and sustainable eco-cultural tourism and other solutions that will benefit the communities, not new gas and fossil fuels. So the presentation that I'd like to share is just a really brief slideshow that one of my sister girls from the Tiwis presented at the Australian Sea Country Conference in Darwin mid last year, or September last year, and it's just an explainer explaining who we are and what we stand for and how we're going to move to action our solutions for bringing back cultural revival and revitalisation alongside scientific proof and facts to offer solutions to care for country in a climate emergency. So it's really important. Yeah, thank you everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to talk. And you say Manang Nutunyach Miratij Mereng and Manang Nutunyach Kuntabo. Protect sea country and protect Kuntabo Yakanich, whale songline and dreaming. Thank you. Yeah, do we just
use this
skip
arrow here?
it?
Okay.
Okay,
So
great.
are you comfortable using that and talking to it?
Yeah, thanks, that'd be great. Okay, so yeah, the first little slide is an intro of who we are. We're supported by Friends of the Earth, and yeah, we're dedicated to that cultural revival in how we can safeguard a sustainable future, and that includes our cultural heritage. There's a slide of myself and my parents at a really important Sea Country gathering of First Nations people that was held down on the Guttabanud country, which is part of Gunditjmara and then connects to Watherong along the Great Ocean Road. And that was our first gathering to yarn about what we need to do. These are some images of Kuntabul, the southern right whales. They are really highly guarded and revered culturally along this coastline, but specifically for the Gunditjmara people, related to our very significant cultural creation business and the birth of new species, but also the birth of Gunditjmara next generations. And it's one big reason why we're matrilineal, which means we follow our grandmother bloodline, and we're a matriarchal society. And it is a little bit different in this part for Watherong country, as I mentioned before, patrilineal, but that's why I'm here to speak on behalf of my grandfather line and our oceanic ancestors, that the whale songline is just out there in that bay. This winter, we launched Saltwater People, a directive from last year's gathering, as well as members supporting the establishment of Southern Australian Aboriginal Land and Sea Management Alliance, who are also presenting. So this is from the conference. Saltwater People brings together all saltwater peoples who wish to join. We humbly accept the support of like-minded, and we will work with allies and amplify our good work. We are an informal network of Indigenous people that is building based on cultural connection through our sacred songlines. As I just mentioned, I'll let people just quickly read through part of our mission. As I mentioned before, some of the formal processes for First Nations people are extremely tiring on a few different levels, but we're under-resourced to be able to defend our country properly, and so that's another reason why SOPEC and Saltwater Peoples were formed, to support that protection and amplify our voices for culture first and cultural protection, cultural heritage protection. We've done a few bits and pieces that are really important to, you know, on a grassroots level. We're yarning with the saltwater people all around the nation, and there's a lot of growing support there. But these other formal processes are really important as well. And these are some of our supporters. And that seems to be really growing, which is really, really heartening for what we're trying to do, because it is that heart connection to country. And as I mentioned at the start, like, we are part of country. This is one of the other films that we, as Saltwater People, were involved in, myself and Jack Pascoe, which is Uncle Bruce Pascoe's son, Dark Emu. mob, and Josie Alec, who's part of the Save the Burra, which is defending the Murujuga sacred rock art sites there. And that short doco tells the story, part of the story of why we're doing what we're doing. This shows some of the risks about the whereabouts these offshore exploration projects are targeted. And as you can see, there's quite a few down in the Southern Ocean and off the west coast. That's a bit more of a closer look up at some of the projects, and you know, we don't want to see maps like that in the future, where, you know, if this gas hub is built, there's going to be more projects like that approved. Yeah, that's the top end, and really we're interconnected, united front fighting to, you know, educate people about the Great Southern Reef and where that extends to. I'm sure some of the other people mentioned that, but it's from around Sydney to all around down Tassie, right along the southern coast, up to around Shark Bay. And, you know, that should be a significant national conversation, but it's not. Here we are defending against all of these petroleum wells and fossil fuels. This is really important, biologically important areas for turtles, but, you know, we can overlap those maps with many different endemic marine life that is only found in certain parts of the world. This slide shows the BIAs for whales, and I think there's not all the different whales and cetaceans have been mapped for that, and there hasn't been enough research done for their migration routes, their breeding patterns, their places that they breed, and yeah, their actual populations. So that's really important information when it comes to the Kuntabul, the southern right whale. There's a lot of data about the northern Atlantic right whales, and they're on the brink of extinction now. So if there's more industrialisation of this coastline, that will spell danger for the southern right whales, our ancestor mob. So this obviously had a bit of a, this slideshow was showing some of the top end stuff because my sister was presenting it, and that's her sea country up that way. But the last one is about, yeah, just we are here to support the traditional owners and give them that voice and help them through any consultation processes and any of the formal stuff that a lot of the time mob are outnumbered and under-resourced to be able to respond properly and have enough time to do that. So I'd just like to finish on saying, you know, I pay my respects to the Wadarong, Wari, you know what I mean, the ancestors that maintain this sea country here, and that we as First Nations really need to be considered in how we move forward in anything that happens on country and sea country, but especially for major infrastructure projects like this. And the dredging alone should be enough to stop this. But with all the rest of the stories, yeah, they need to listen.
Thank you for coming along. It's a real privilege for us to be able to hear your stories and to hear them from you. Are you able to tell us, you've mentioned that Corio Bay was used as a sort of a nursery area. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so the nursery for not only marine life, as in fish and mussels, but the plant life as well, and the shallows. So when you're a woman with a mob of kids and babies, and it's safe for you to go out there and collect those resources, and you're in this protected bay, you know, they wouldn't be out fishing in the deeper water with the young children. So it was really important in that way, but that each part of country had that interconnected relationship. So yeah, those a lot of those resources were multi-use resources. They weren't just like, let's catch a fish and eat it. Let's use the bones and let's use the scales for our gardens, our coastal gardens, and let's use the grasses as part of medicine, because our seaweed is really underestimated, powerful medicine. And so those grasses were part of, why a lot of women were connected to those healing practices, and really health and well-being of your whole nation is, you know, paramount. So that was really highly regarded information. And again, in colonisation, why now it's hard to revive some of that and get that as on par with scientific research, and knowing that, you know, if they muck up too much sand basically in a shallow area like that, it's going to destroy that nursery habitat completely. It's just common sense. You know, you can just look at it and know, but knowing different things about how the mussels grow and how, you know, they're born there, and this growth of the mussel beds and how they're interconnected. And as I mentioned before, the Corio Bay is the smaller part. So if you think of like a giant fish trap across the shallow waters and that was maintained for a long time. And then obviously as time went by, those resources got depleted, and so that that negative effect just filtered down as more and more cultural heritage got destroyed. More and more of those natural resources weren't being able to be used the same way, and the same maintenance wasn't being able to be given to those areas. And, you know, that's really important, like access for mob to do that. Like, we're already shut out of those significant areas, especially as women. For other, you know, now there's this amazing fishing industry that's here. And we like to say, well, that's because, you know, these Wallarong women were really clever, and they, you know, built the foundations of what's here now. You know, but I don't think they'll be acknowledged for that. But it's good to say those things, you know, and to say about that's, you know, if you look at Budgebim down in Gunditjmara country, it's just got World Heritage listing a few years ago, and it's a really significant aquaculture system for kuyang, the short-finned eel. And then if you apply that kind of cultural context to this area and what that, you know, that maintenance to a large area, it's just, you know, if there's more research that's to be done, that's what they'll end up finding, I'm sure. And that's part of the stories that's, you know, about the shape of the land and connects to the different points around this area. So the hill, the highest point over there, looks directly out across the bay towards the Yuyangs. And so the shape of the bay and the land and all the different parts that make up country are really significant. And sometimes, you know, people can't see that because of what's already been built on top of that. You know, so that's really important. But the water quality as well, I think people separate elements of country from Aboriginal people and places, cultural heritage sites as well. And the water is sacred, our salt water and fresh water. That's what gives our oceanic planet life, you know. So the saltwater songlines are really significant for many coastal peoples, but I know here where the river comes out in the bay, on that side, that was a really significant place of a food resource, a meeting point, a safe area, but also where the fresh water meets the salt water. Probably up further stream a little bit more, but you know, that's the way of the land here and how it interconnects with our ancient laws. So I think that's something that's really, you know, if we want to respect our place of belonging and how much those old knowledge systems could help with the Gary word bushfires, you know, in a climate emergency, fire knowledge. So yeah, that there is that knowledge out there, and I would also say about that science, you know, the state government and the proponents should fund Indigenous research to really have a look about what is there, what underwater cultural heritage, that they are going to directly destroy, and then search for what else is there, because that's how some of those cultural heritage management plans for native title and cultural heritage are put into place by establishing what used to be there and then testing or surveying for what else could potentially be there. And because of the shallow nature of the bay and what I mentioned before about that area being maintained, and it could have even been that the outer bay was, you know, where the Kuntabals could have brought their babies, could have came pregnant to have them before it was industrialised like they did on Gunditjmara country. So yeah, the research needs to be backed and resourced to find, yeah, what's there.
And we understand that cultural values assessment is being prepared, or might have already been prepared, by the Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation, and that'll inform a cultural heritage management plan that will be prepared for the project. Is there anything you wanted to say to us about that process?
No, I think maybe we need to support that process and support the Wadawurrung to, you know, assert their birthrights to this country and help negotiate about how significant that cultural heritage is. But I will say that, you know, there was a quarry that we were protecting down on Gunditjmara country, and for us that sort of understand some of the formal processes as much as we can, understand that those cultural heritage management plans, we don't actually get the chance to say no and no full stop. It's always a negotiation of how they're going to mitigate the damage to cultural heritage. So in cases like this, I don't think they can counteract or mitigate damage of this scale for the proposal that they want to put forward. But yeah, I just don't think the actual processes, the cultural heritage protection laws that inform the cultural heritage management plans aren't strong enough for protection.
Did you have any questions?
I'm not sure. Hopefully there's a simple answer to this one. I'm not sure there
I'll
will be.
keep it brief, sorry.
No, not at all. I've enjoyed listening. Is there a formal relationship between your organisation and the Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Group? Do they consult you on matters relating to underwater cultural heritage and get your input?
Directly for underwater cultural heritage, I'm not sure because of how it's structured. Both corporations, I assume, would be under a board and working groups and governed by the family groups that make up the corporations. But there's definitely, because of the borders, there's definitely that interaction about working together in different spaces. I think fire has been one of the spaces that's been worked in collaboration before, but I'm not really that sure about most of the marine or sea country side of things. So that was one of the other reasons why I wanted to make sure that I submitted something to say to, back up both of those connections. And yeah, we'll hopefully go on yarn with the likes of Karina and some other local mob here and unite to protect.
Thank you. It's just an observation. I understand resourcing and how much you're in demand and pressure on time. There is 2 chapters of the EES, the Supplementary EES, that directly relate to topics that you've raised today. One relating, Chapter 7 is underwater cultural heritage and the work that's been done, and an extensive bit of research and new investigations was undertaken about the impact of dredging. And the other one is Chapter 8, which is the cultural heritage values. Just direct you to that for your information if you wish to. And it shows what WOTAC are working with the proponent and ongoing to try to address matters.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, yes. I haven't read through all of the documents, but we're slowly getting there. There's quite a few.
So thank you for your time.
Yeah. We know how stretched your resources are, and as I said, it's a real privilege for us to hear from you, and First Nations perspectives on these projects are a really important part of what we need to consider. So thank you again for coming along and speaking to us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. That was our last submitter for the day. Now I think we have the school's submission that came through this afternoon. One thing we wanted to address you on, just having heard for 3 days submissions from the community, we're very mindful of our terms of reference and that they require us to consider and report on those 4 relevant environmental matters. There's 2 matters that have arisen from the submissions we've heard in the last 3 days that we would like you to be able to address us on in reply. One is the impacts of further dredging. So marine impacts are clearly before us. One of the objectives of the SEES, which is outlined in the Minister's directions, is to assess the impacts of this project on the marine environment. So the SEES has assessed the dredging of the FSRU mooring area and the manoeuvring basin nearby refinery pier. We've heard a lot of submissions to the effect that there will likely be additional dredging required of the shipping channels. And people have said to us the environmental effects of this project can't really be known until we know the full extent of the dredging that might be required on the channels. If you're able to address us in reply submissions just on the process going forward and the timing, I guess, of when those assessments will be made and when it'll be known whether there's any further dredging required of those channels, who would do that further dredging, what the process would be for assessing the environmental impacts of that further dredging, and what the approval process would look like. We don't need you to go into chapter and verse. We just need to understand how the assessment of that, if there is in fact any further dredging required, would fit in with this process and what we've been asked to look at. The second thing is in relation to the first submission we heard after lunch today, which was about seagrass rehabilitation. And Member O'Neill was correct. There is a new mitigation measure in there about seagrass transplanting along the seawater transfer pipe to facilitate seagrass rehabilitation. And we were just wondering why that was confined to the seawater, because we haven't really talked about that with the marine experts, why that was confined to the seawater transfer pipe and whether there was any consideration given to whether seagrass rehabilitation might need to be looked at in terms of dredging areas or areas impacted by dredging.
I think it's the decommissioning works that are the subject of the 20.
Okay,
So
right.
I think that's the decommissioning of that pipeline.
Okay, so
that's why that's attaching to that.
Right, okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, we've got the school down for 4 hours tomorrow.
That's our understanding.
Yes.
Mr. Fernanzio and Ms. Collins will be here to present.
Yes. And we've got a 10 o'clock start. So we will see everyone at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.